Chapter 35-33. The car drove all the way to the neutral zone. There were a total of 5 countries in North Africa. However, the neutral zone in the center was Bilibid. It was also the most prosperous area in North Africa. This place was away from the Sahara Desert and was the golden zone of North Africa. Therefore, it relied on oil and many mineral resources and was very developed. Throughout history, North Africa had always been protected by famine and plague. At the same time, there was also invasion and smoke. The car finally arrived at the border of Bilibid. After passing a few checkpoints, they were all passed by using food and US dollars. When they entered Bilibid, the intensity of the war was even more visible. The originally bustling street was now quiet and empty. On the side of the street, there were messy piles of items and corpses. Just more than 10 hours ago, the war had affected the central area. On the road, her car was stopped many times. Once, it was directly stopped by the rebel army. Chu Ho saw that they had tanks and missiles, so she obediently stopped and allowed them to check. Chu Ho got out of the car and first showed her China passport. Now that the country was strong with this passport, it became a foolproof pass. As long as she showed her passport, she would not be troubled. Then Chu Ho stepped aside and let them check the car. However, there were only some daily necessities in the bag and nothing else was found. When she entered the territory, she threw away the pistol in advance because she knew that if she encountered the rebel army, they would stop the car and search it. If they found the pistol, it would be disadvantageous to her. As for the food and cash, Chu Ho would not let them search, so she hid them in other corners of the car in advance. Perhaps it was because of racial advantage. Most of the people in Bilibid were black. With the suppression of intelligence, they were obviously very stupid. Therefore, they did not find any food, so they let her go. It was not that Chu Ho looked down on them. The intelligence of these soldiers could make her cry. When she arrived in Bilibid, it was already dawn. She found an international hotel and made do for the day. After resting for a few hours, she continued to advance toward the center of the war. The war spread to Bilibid, and many cities in Bilibid fell. The Worth factory was one of the few cities that fell. Worth was in Jamal, Bilibid, which was dozens of kilometers away from the capital of Bilibid. She rested well, filled up her fuel tank, and set off again until she reached the border of Jamal city. As night fell, she bypassed the checkpoint and entered the city through another gap. She was quite familiar with the terrain here, so she avoided many war zones along the way and avoided many unnecessary troubles. After entering Jamal, the entire city was shrouded in the shadow of death. Smoke filled the air as the flames of war swirled in the air. Even at night, he could still see many refugees hugging their dead or injured relatives and crying in despair as she walked along the streets. Blood flowed like a river on the road. One could imagine how intense the battle was during the day. Hell on earth, city of despair. The embassy was located in the city center of Jamal, right next to the government building. Chu Ho relied on his memory to refer to the road signs and found the government building. However, he was shocked to see that the government building had been bombarded until it was on the verge of collapse. On the wall, there was a huge hole, mottled with blood, and the glass door had been bombed into pieces. There were countless casualties at the door, and there were piles of corpses that had not been cleaned up in time. Chapter 35-34. Even in the midst of war in the fallen North Africa, whether it was the government or the rebel army, no one dared to touch the embassy. It was originally a local war. If the embassy was invaded, it would undoubtedly mean that the war had escalated to an international level. Chu Ho parked the car at the door, pushed the door open, and walked in. In the darkness, just as she pushed the door open, her combat boots stepped on a soft corpse. Then, in the pitch-black silence, she vaguely heard the sound of a gun being loaded. She immediately raised her hands calmly and said loudly in English, "I'm Chinese. I'm not carrying any weapons." A beam of high beam shone toward her. The strong light fell on her face and blinded her. Chu Ho calmly accepted the inspection until it was confirmed that she was a real Chinese. Finally, a light in the hall was turned on. Under the light, Chu Ho saw that countless Chinese had gathered together and were curled up in a corner, staring at her in fear. Chu-ho was shocked. She did not expect that there were still so many Chinese who had not evacuated. Why are you still here? Because the evacuation fleet has already evacuated. The next batch will only arrive in 3 days. The people in the embassy have all evacuated. We're all here waiting for rescue. Yeah, we don't dare to go out because the embassy is our last refuge. If we go out, those bullets have no eyes. It's very dangerous. It turned out that there were still many Chinese factory employees who did not manage to evacuate in time. Therefore, many people rushed into the embassy. Amidst the flames of war, the current embassy was like a refuge as well as the last protective harbor. Although those people did not dare to invade the embassy, there were often some crazy rebels who did not care about the identity of the Chinese. They burned, killed, and robbed the stores and supermarkets opened by the Chinese. They even went to the embassy and robbed the food and water. Although it would not hurt their lives, the next batch of rescue fleet would only arrive at the port in 3 days. In other words, they had to hold on for more than 4 days. There were a lot of people, hundreds of people. Food and water were very limited. They had handed over all the cash they had. However, they could not afford food and water. Otherwise, with so many people, they could not last 4 days. Therefore, even if they were in the embassy, they did not dare to turn on the lights. They were worried that the rebels would see the light source and rush in to rob them. This place had already been robbed once and a few people were injured. Therefore, they did not dare to turn on the lights. Chu-ho heard that, frowned and asked, "In other words, the country will send another ship to take care of your evacuation?" "Yes." Then, Chu-ho took a step forward and asked, "Are there any of Werther's men here?" After a long time, a man in orange uniform stood up slowly and asked in surprise, "You're looking for Werther's men?" Chapter 35:35. After he said this, the others were obviously trembling in fear. When Chu-ho heard this, he frowned. He had an ominous feeling in his heart. If Werther was controlled by the people of Hurricane, then what about Gu Jinglian? She scanned the crowd but did not find him. Such an eye-catching man, even if he was thrown into the crowd, he would be found at a glance. Even if she did not find him, he would stand up and show himself when he saw her. But she did not see him. This meant that he was not here. Chu-ho asked again, "You said that all of Werther's employees are here?" The man hurriedly explained, "No, only 2/3 of them are here. The other 1/3, more than 100, are trapped in the war zone. When they left Werther, the rebel army had already taken over the entire villa. That area has been sealed off by the rebel army. It's the center of the war. I'm going to find someone now." Chu-ho said again, "His name is Gu Jinglian. Where is he now? Is he also trapped in the war zone?" Everyone was shocked and looked at each other. The man asked in surprise, "Gu Jinglian isn't that our boss?" "Yes, Sugu, why are you looking for our boss?" Chu-ho said, "He's my husband. I heard that North Africa has fallen, so I came here to look for him." Chu-ho stood up straight and looked around. He said calmly, "I need someone who is familiar with the terrain of Jamal to take me to the war zone to look for someone. Is anyone willing to come with me?" "Don't go." The man immediately said, "Miss, I don't know if what you said is true. At least, I've never heard of our boss having a wife. The problem is that the war zone is now full of rebel soldiers. The streets are full of corpses and soldiers. If you go there rashly, you're not looking for someone, you're looking for death. Moreover, all of Werther's people who can come out have already come out. The rest are trapped in the middle of the war. I'm afraid their lives are uncertain. The hope of survival is very slim. If you go now, you'll be wasting your life. My man is not so weak. Your man won't die so easily." Chu-ho, on the other hand, was very confident in Gu Jinglian. Now, there was no news. That was enough to prove that he was still alive. As long as she was alive, she had a reason to take risks. "No one dares to go with you." The man had a timid expression on his face as he trembled and said, "Those rebels are too cruel. No matter who they saw, Caucasian, Chinese, or civilian, they killed them all. What did that mean? If they went there now, they would die. It wasn't easy for us to escape from Worth. We won't risk our lives again." He did not force him to make his stance clear and resolute. After all, being afraid of death seemed to be a human instinct. After experiencing despair, the desire to survive grew stronger. "All right, I'll go by myself." Ho had just turned around when a young man's calm voice came from behind him. "I'll go with you." Chapter 35-36. He spoke fluent Chinese and walked up to her. "I grew up in Jamal, so I'm very familiar with the place. I'll go with you." Ho was a little surprised. She looked behind him and asked, "Where are your parents?" He said that he wanted to go. Perhaps he was naive, but wouldn't his parents stop him? The young man's eyes darkened, and his voice weakened. "My parents are already dead." Ho was stunned. The young man pursed his lips, but he didn't cry. He gritted his teeth and said, "They were killed by the rebels." Ho smiled. "Aren't you afraid?" The young man shook his head and said firmly, "I'm not afraid. Anyway, my father is gone, my mother is gone, and my sister." He gritted his teeth and closed his eyes. "They're gone too. I'm alone. There's nothing to be afraid of." Ho seemed to see herself when she was young. In the war, her family was destroyed, and her heart was filled with hatred and helplessness. She smiled and held out her hand to him. "You're so brave. Okay, come with me, but I'll protect you." The young man nodded, held her hand, and followed her out of the embassy, leaving the crowd looking at each other. When Ho left the embassy, she was very cautious. She looked around and made sure that there was no one around before she opened the car door and told the young man to get in and fasten his seatbelt. She quickly got into the car, started the car, and drove in the direction of Werther. "There's no one in Werther now. My father is a worker in Wedded." A few days ago, Wedded was occupied by a large group of armed men. According to the other uncles, they're from the Hurricane Group, not the rebel army. However, they seem to be very powerful. So many Chinese factories were smashed and robbed by the rebel army, but Wedded was the only one left unscathed. Hurricane Ho narrowed her eyes. Uncle Fu said that Hurricane Group used her and Xiaobao to threaten Gu Jinglian to sign the agreement. He had to give up Werther and that piece of land. The losses were heavy. She still couldn't figure out why Gu Jinglian did that. Was it because of her? Was he protecting her? Thinking of this possibility, Ho suddenly laughed at himself. How could this be? This man had always been arrogant and self-righteous. How could he give up such a huge benefit just to protect her? The young man continued, "It's very dangerous to drive to Werther now. However, from what I know, there are many China factories in the war zone. Those factories are all state-owned enterprises, so the rebels don't dare to touch them. Some people might be hiding there. Where do we go?" The young man pointed at the road sign in front of them. "Go to that junction and head south. You are really familiar with the terrain." The young man nodded. "I grew up here." "Then how do you speak Chinese so well?" "That's because my parents are both from China, and I'm also from China. Of course, I have to speak Chinese, but I also know a little English. If my parents were still alive, with our passports, we would be able to catch up with the first batch of evacuation ships." At this point, the youth fell silent again. She probably thought of something sad again. His parents were shot to death because they were trying to protect him, those damned rebels. They deserved to die for being so cruel and merciless. Ho patted her head and smiled. "Don't be sad. It's all in the past." Chapter 35-37. "By the way, what's your name?" "My name is Linshi." "Linshi. That's a nice name." When they reached the intersection, Linshi suddenly said, "Let's take the small path. I know a shortcut." Needless to say, Ho did not dare to drive the car on the main street. She knew that there must be a lot of troops stationed there. Therefore, she followed Linshi's directions and drove to the small path. The so-called small path was extremely bumpy and difficult to walk on. The small path in the forest was a muddy path cultivated by the local people. It was not the road paved with cement. With this opening, it was dawn again. Ho did not dare to rest. Although it was dangerous to drive when tired, this was the wild forest. There were wild beasts everywhere. Jackals, lions, cheetahs. It was very dangerous. She drove all the way to the factory that Linshi had pointed out. After getting out of the car, she looked around and confirmed that there was no danger before letting Xianxia get out of the car. At the entrance of the factory, there was no one. There was no sign of life at all. Chu Ho took out the pistol from her waist belt and loaded it. She looked around vigilantly. Her left hand held Xianxia's hand tightly until they walked into the factory. She pushed the door open. Under the moonlight, it was full of dust. Xianxia waved his hand and coughed a few times. Chu Ho quickly covered his mouth and shushed him. "Don't make a sound." Xianxia nodded and obediently shut his mouth. He did not make a sound. Chu Ho pushed the door open and walked in. She took out the night vision goggles from her bag and put them on. With this, she could clearly see the terrain even in the dark. Suddenly, two figures appeared in her line of sight. They were hiding behind the wall. They were local black people with guns in their hands. Although they were black, it was difficult to recognize them in the dark. However, Chu Ho's night vision goggles had thermal imaging. Therefore, she saw them at a glance. She immediately stopped in her tracks and said in the local language, "We are not rebels." The black people did not expect her to notice them. They looked at each other but were still vigilant. They tightened their grip on the guns in their hands. Chu Ho did not move forward. Instead, she took half a step back and put away her pistol. She slowly raised her hands to show her sincerity. "Don't worry. You are very safe. I won't hurt you." Only then did the few black civilians let down their guard and turn on a lamp. Under the light, He was surprised to find that all the factory employees and civilians who had run over to hide were hiding on the second floor. They looked down nervously. When they saw that it was a woman and a child who came without any armed forces, they let down their guard. "Who are you?" "My husband is." He asked again, "Are there any Weyerts?" "Co." The man became even more suspicious. "Why haven't I heard that President Gu has a wife? We just got married not long ago." Chu Ho saw that he did not believe her, so she provided a few more private information about the Gu family and the Gu Corporation. Finally, the man believed her, but he looked very guilty. Chapter 35-38. It turned out that after Hurricane took over Weyert, all the higher-ups of Weyert wanted to cover Gu Jinglian's escape as soon as possible. Unfortunately, they were ambushed by the rebel army and had no choice but to split up. After that, there was no news of Gu Jinglian. When Chu Ho heard this, he frowned. "When we split up, how many people did Gu Jinglian have?" "About 30 people. 5 of them were mercenaries. They were very strong. That means someone is protecting him. Then from what you can see, where could he be now?" The man was suddenly in a dilemma. "Since you're asking, I can't say. Jamal is not big, but it's not small either. It has a radius of 100 miles. All the communication towers have been disconnected. Co Gu doesn't have a satellite phone with him, so we can't contact him. But I'm guessing that they won't be too far away. After all, the neutral zone has fallen. It's too chaotic outside. Co Gu and the rest should have found a place to hide. Now, other than some of the armed forces, no one else can enter. Waiting for rescue? Who are they waiting for?" "I heard that everyone in the embassy has evacuated. Some of the Chinese citizens haven't. But the fleet should be here soon. I'm guessing that they'll be heading in the direction of the embassy." Chu Ho immediately interrupted him and said, "The embassy is now sealed off. There are rebel forces outside. It's a war zone. It's very dangerous to walk to the embassy." The man was puzzled. "How did you get in?" "Car." "Cut." That person turned pale with fright. "You just drove your car in so openly? There are so many checkpoints and they're all occupied by the rebel army." "I didn't pass through the checkpoints. I walked through the small path." Chu Ho paused and suddenly sighed. "But the car is out of gas now. Do you have gas here?" "We do." "Are you going to look for Co Gu now?" The man said with a headache, "You can't do it during the day. At night, the war zone stops. During the day, it's chaotic outside. It's too dangerous. Why don't you stay here and rest for the night? When night falls, you can go out and look for him. It's not too late." Chu Ho nodded. "I know." She lowered her head and said to Xianxia, Let's rest here for the night. Yes. Chu Ho and Lin Shi went to the second floor and found a corner. There was no bed, only a mat, and they lay down. At this time, the weather was already a little cold. Just lying on the mat without any shelter, it was inevitable that it would be a bit cold. Lin Shi curled up in a corner, shivering from the cold. Suddenly, a coat covered his body. Lin Shi turned his head and saw that Chu Ho had taken off his thick coat and covered him with it. She only had a combat vest on her body, which was very thin. Lin Shi's heart warmed. He was a little touched, but he asked uneasily, "Aren't you cold?" "It's not cold. I'm used to it." She had experienced even more difficult environments. Compared to the time when she had to walk in the humid rainforest, this environment paled in comparison. She lay down, but from the corner of her eye, she saw Lin Shi move closer to her. He covered her with his clothes and hugged her tightly. Chapter 35-39. Chu Ho also closed her eyes. Perhaps she was too tired from rushing through the night and the high intensity of her mental strength, so she fell asleep immediately. He actually fell into a deep sleep. When she woke up again, she was called by Lin Shi. Chu Ho opened her eyes and saw the black muzzle of a gun. The hole in the distance was emitting cold air. Almost instinctively, she grabbed the gun at her waist. However, the next second, a bayonet was right in front of her. She recognized the gun. It was an AK-47 equipped with a sharp triangular bayonet. The body of the bayonet was ridged. It was a three-sided bayonet with 3 blood grooves. This meant that when the bayonet pierced into the human body, it would rapidly increase the bleeding through the blood grooves on the 3 sides. The muscles would contract and be unable to adhere to the surface of the bayonet. The wound would appear as a square hole and would not be able to stop the bleeding and heal. This meant that such a wound could not be treated immediately. If there was too much bleeding, it would be fatal. Moreover, in such an environment, once the bayonet pierced through, it would be fatal. Chu Ho looked at the gun and saw that the person holding the gun was a black man wearing tattered clothes but a red headscarf. She immediately recognized that this was the rebel army. The bayonet was only an inch away from her glabella. Even if he did not make a move, she would be stabbed in the glabella if she moved slightly. Chu Ho quickly calmed down. From the corner of her eye, she saw Lin Shi kneeling on the ground with his head in his hands. Looking from afar, downstairs, a large group of black men with red headscarves were standing in the middle of the field with guns in their hands. Rows of civilians were kneeling on the ground with their heads in their hands, trembling. Chu Ho suddenly realized that this place had been invaded by the rebel army. She let go of the pistol and raised her hands, indicating that she should give up resisting. Another black man walked over and took the gun from her waist. Then, he grabbed her collar and threw her to the middle of the field. In just a short time, she had a preliminary understanding of the current situation. Yesterday at the bottom of the road, the path she had taken to get here was all muddy. The car left deep tire marks along the way. These marks probably attracted the rebel army's attention. They followed the traces and followed all the way here, exposing this shelter. Chu Ho was dragged all the way downstairs. Everyone glared at her angrily. Her arrival had also attracted the rebel army. They originally had a chance to hide in the rescue team, but now, this place was exposed by her, implicating so many people. Chu Ho was thrown into the middle of the field. He questioned, "Whose car is this?" She remained silent. The car was locked, so these people smashed the car window and found her combat bag. They found a lot of things and found the documents in the bag. So, they suspected that the owner of the car was a spy from the government who came to investigate. Chu Ho did not say anything. She couldn't admit it. Moreover, there was a lot of cash, food, and fresh water in the car. If she admitted it, they would definitely take away her car keys, open the car, and rob all the food inside. The rebel soldiers saw that the entire place was silent. They searched the crowd and suddenly walked into the crowd and pulled Lin Shi out. He was the youngest child present. The soldier directly flipped over an oil barrel from the side, opened the cap, and directly poured the oil all over him. Chapter 35-40. Lin Shi hugged his body tightly, but he did not beg for mercy. He knelt on the ground and looked up. His eyes were filled with hatred as he stared at the soldiers. He knew that the car belonged to Chu Ho, but he did not say anything. The soldier lit a match and waved it. He threatened, "I'll ask again. Whose car is this?" Everyone was so nervous that they could not say a coherent sentence. However, many of them glanced at Chu Ho as if they were signaling something to the soldiers. At this critical juncture, they naturally wanted to save their own lives. The lives of others were not important. The soldiers looked at Chu Ho suspiciously. When Chu Ho saw this, he could no longer remain silent. He suddenly said, "This is my car. It has nothing to do with this child." Xianxia looked at him in surprise. He was deeply moved. "Hand over the car keys." Chu Ho took a deep breath. He calmly took out the keys from his trouser pocket and threw them to them. When the soldier saw this, he sneered and threw the lit match at Xianxia. At this moment, his body was covered in gasoline. If the match landed beside him, he would definitely die. Xianxia closed his eyes in despair. Chu Ho reacted quickly and leaped toward Xianxia. At the same time, seeing that she had suddenly stood up, the vigilant soldier raised his gun and pulled the trigger. The bullet pierced through the air and brushed past her waist. It passed through the bullets and hit a man behind Chu Ho, piercing his thigh. He cried out in pain and hugged his thigh as he twitched. There was no fire as expected. Xianxia opened her eyes in disbelief, only to see Chu He pouncing on her. In her palm, she caught the matchstick tightly and snapped it into two. The skin on her palm was scalded, and it was a shocking red. Chu Ho pulled him into his arms and said solemnly, "I promised you that I would protect you. I have to keep my word." Xia's eyes flickered and tears flowed out. A few soldiers raised their guns and aimed at Chu Ho. Chu Ho turned around and shielded Xianxia behind him. He said word by word, "There's cash and food in the car. I hid them in a place. Use these to exchange for this child's life. Take us there. If you let this child go, I'll tell you." The soldiers looked at each other before putting away their guns. Chu Ho immediately said to Xianxia, "Quickly find a place to hide." Xianxia shook his head and said firmly, "I want to be with you." "Be good, I'm fine. Find a place to hide, okay? No matter what happens, don't come out." Xianxia wavered a little. Gritting his teeth, he stood up and walked a few steps. Seeing that the soldiers seemed to have tacitly agreed to let him go, he ran into the warehouse, found a secret room, and hid himself. Chu Ho stood up and covered his wound. He followed the soldiers out of the factory and to the parking lot. "Where are the money and things?" Chu Ho pretended to be in pain and said with difficulty, "It's in the secret compartment of the armrest." "Take it out." "I'm injured," Chu Ho said with difficulty. "I don't have any strength. Be honest." Two soldiers opened the car door and went into the car to rummage through it. Chu Ho narrowed his eyes and looked around. There were a total of 4 soldiers here. 2 of them went into the car to look for things. Their backs were facing him, so they couldn't see his every move. Chapter 35:41. Chu Ho kicked the 2 soldiers into the car and locked the door. Her smooth movements were completed within a few seconds. Before the other 2 soldiers could react, Chu Ho flashed behind them. Just as they raised their pistols to aim at her, Chu Ho grabbed that person's arm and twisted it hard. She aimed at his elbow joint and heard a "kacha" sound as the joint fell off. She lifted her leg and kicked him a few meters away. Chu Ho snatched the gun and casually fired 2 shots at the other soldier who was about to pull the trigger. In an instant, that person's glabella was shot and he fell to the ground. The soldier who was kicked away struggled to get up from the ground. He pulled out a tri-edge army knife from his waist and waved it at her. Chu Ho dodged nimbly and took the opportunity to raise her fist and hit him hard on the nose. The most vulnerable parts of a person's face were the eyes and the bridge of the nose. Her punch directly broke that person's nose. The soldier held onto his bleeding nose and howled in pain. However, before he could shout out a coherent sentence, Chu Ho's ghostly figure flashed behind him and locked his neck from behind. She exerted strength in her arm and broke his throat. These 2 pitiful soldiers, until they died, did not expect that this frail-looking woman would have such powerful skills. They were afraid of her because she had a weapon on her and were worried that she was from some military unit or the government army. However, No one would have thought that her skills were comparable to the top mercenaries. The two soldiers in the car saw this scene and knew that this woman's skills were definitely not something they could win against. Hence, they frantically honked the car horn, hoping that the sound would attract the attention of the other soldiers in the factory. Chu Ho became alert. She suddenly walked to the front of the car and held onto the edge of the car roof. She then kicked the mailbox at the bottom of the car. She was wearing combat boots that were equipped with a short blade. With a kick, a dent appeared in the fuel tank. She kicked again fiercely and the sharp short blade directly cut a hole in the fuel tank. A stream of air flowed into the fuel tank. She turned around and plunged into the bushes at the side. The soldiers in the factory heard the sound of the horn and hurriedly armed themselves. They carried their submachine guns and rushed out. However, when they walked out of the door, they saw that there was no one around. It was dead silent. They glanced at the car and saw two corpses lying beside it. The leader took a look and his expression turned cold. He walked over and grabbed one of the corpses by the collar to check his breathing. He was already dead. What happened? Where was that woman? The two soldiers in the car kept hitting the window. The leader walked over, bent his arm and broke the window with his elbow. The two soldiers tried to climb out of the car window. However, the leader immediately signaled them to keep quiet. He could vaguely hear the sound of dripping. It was especially clear in this quiet night. The leader looked around and suddenly realized that the sound was coming from the bottom. He squatted down and was surprised to see that there was a pool of oil on the floor of the room, giving off a pungent smell of petrol. There was a hole in the fuel tank and petrol was leaking all over the floor. Chapter 35-42. Before he could make a run for it, Chu-He narrowed her eyes and pulled the trigger from the bushes. Bang! A bullet whizzed through the air. Boom! The bullet accurately hit the fuel tank. The fuel tank was already on the verge of exploding when it came into contact with the oxygen. With the ignition of the gasoline and the sparks from the bullet, a strong explosion occurred in an instant. The entire vehicle exploded, and the flames soared into the sky. The powerful shockwave was like an avalanche, sweeping everyone to the ground. A row of soldiers who couldn't dodge in time were instantly swallowed up by the flames. The flames almost lit up half the night sky. The violent explosion was deafening. Chu Ho was also pushed to the ground by the blast. She crawled on the ground until the blast subsided. Then she got up and slowly walked out of the bushes. She glanced at the volcanic sea of fire and turned to walk back to the factory. One of them was pushed to the side by the blast and vomited blood. In his blurry vision, he struggled to support his body, raised his hand, and shot at her abdomen. Chu Ho felt as if her abdomen had been hit by something. Immediately after, she felt a burning pain and a terrifying wound appeared on her abdomen. She clutched her bleeding abdomen and staggered. She knelt on the ground on one knee. When she turned around, she saw the soldier fall to the ground heavily and take his last breath. She struggled to stand. At first, she did not feel anything when she was shot. However, after taking a step, she could not stand anymore. She swayed and fell to the ground. The pain was so intense that she broke out in a cold sweat. Chu Ho struggled to support her body. She immediately tore the vest on her body and pressed on the wound to squeeze out the blood clots. The dagger was tied to the back of her waist. The bullet accurately pierced through the dagger and embedded itself in her skin. Fortunately, the dagger blocked the bullet and did not penetrate too deeply. However, the pain was that the dagger was penetrated. The metal skin stuck to the wound, and the pain was heart-wrenching. Chu Ho crawled to the side of the tree with great difficulty and knelt on the ground. Biting his collar tightly, he tied the cloth around his wound and pulled out the dagger. After disinfecting it with fire, he endured the pain and made a cross on the wound. Then he pulled out the bullet with his bare hands. The excruciating pain caused her to break out in a cold sweat. She closed her eyes, disinfected the wound, and bandaged it. She took out some cotton wool from her trousers and roughly bandaged the wound. It hurt so much that he was confused. She held onto the tree trunk and stood up. However, she only felt the world before her eyes turned dark. Her entire back seemed to have lost all feeling. It was numb, and only pain was constantly transmitted to her. Chu Ho could no longer stand steadily and fainted. Before she closed her eyes, She vaguely saw a few black soldiers running towards her. They were holding their guns and staring at her. When she woke up again, she was splashed with a basin of salt water. The salt water flowed directly into her wound, and she woke up in pain. Hiss! Chu-Ho opened her eyes abruptly. The salt water flowed into her eyes, and it was bitter and painful. Immediately after, her wrists were tightly bound and her toes were off the ground. These reminded her that she was hanging from a tree branch. A few black soldiers pointed their guns at her. One of them, who was holding a red headscarf, pointed at her and asked in the local language, "Who are you? Did you kill these brothers?" Chapter 35:43. When the man saw this, he was so angry that he kicked her. Chu-Ho's body slammed into a thick tree trunk. She was in so much pain that she couldn't scream. "Speak!" Chu-Ho sneered and said contemptuously, "I'm not from the government." The leader didn't believe her at all. He was certain that Chu-Ho was a mercenary sent by the government or an intelligence agent from some organization. It was because of this that Chu-Ho didn't bother to explain. Anyway, even if she said she wasn't and revealed her identity, they might not believe her. Chu-Ho heard someone ask, "Captain, how should we deal with this person?" In her daze, she only heard the leader say, "Behead her as an example to the public." Beheading was the most common method used by terrorists. Perhaps the people who lived in peaceful countries couldn't understand this method. The so-called beheading mentioned by these rebels was to tie the person's hands and feet and make them kneel on the ground. Then, they would use a very blunt butcher's knife to cut the throat bit by bit. Rather than beheading, it was more like cutting the throat. As the victim wouldn't die immediately, he would be able to see clearly how his throat was cut. Hence, this method of death was especially painful. Hence, the blade was very blunt. It was to make the victim suffer as much pain as possible to promote martial arts. When Chu-Ho heard this, she didn't show much fear on her face. She was pushed to the ground. A soldier grabbed her hair and forced her to kneel on the ground. Then, he took out a small rusty knife from behind him and slowly pressed it against her neck. Chu-Ho could feel the cold blade against her skin. She slowly closed her eyes. However, the expected pain didn't come. Vaguely, she felt the hand that was grabbing her loosening its grip, and the knife fell to the ground. Immediately after, hot scarlet blood fell onto her shoulder and soaked her clothes. Chu-He woke up at once and looked up in surprise, only to be met with a lifeless face. The soldier's eyes were wide open. He was attacked from behind. A sharp triangular military knife almost pierced his heart. He fell weakly on top of her. Chu-Ho couldn't bear it anymore and fell to the ground. Bang, bang, bang. She immediately recognized that it was the sound of a gun. The barrel of the cloud shotgun was very thick, and the diameter of the muzzle was at most 20 millimeters. It had a lot of firepower and was very wide. It was a weapon with terrifying explosive power in close combat. If a bullet were to hit a human body, the wound would explode and expand, resulting in a one-hit kill. If the gun was fired at close range, the bullet could directly send a person flying. Chu-Ho fell to the ground. He vaguely saw a particularly tall man, fully armed, with 3 pistols on his back and 2 rows of bullets on his shoulder. He held a gun and agilely dodged the soldiers' attacks. None of the bullets missed. In just a short moment, more than a dozen soldiers present were shot and fell to the ground. Just then, a child ran to her side and patted her face gently. He asked nervously, "Sister, are you okay?" Chu-Ho looked up and met Lin Shi's anxious eyes. "It's Lin Shi dragged her to the front of a tree and used a dagger to cut the rope that tied her up. However, he found the wound on her abdomen and frowned in pain. "How are you? Are you okay? You're injured." Chapter 35:44. "Didn't I tell you to hide?" Lin Shi said, "There's a secret passage behind the factory. I escaped through that secret passage. I followed the clues you provided and found the person you were talking about. Gu Jinglian. Is that his name?" Chu-Ho was stunned. She could not help but look at the man. In the night, the man put away his gun and checked the corpses on the ground one by one. If he found someone who was still alive, he would kill him directly. He stood up and turned around. His handsome and heroic face came into her sight. "Gu!" She opened her mouth and widened her eyes in disbelief. She did not expect him to appear. Gu Jinglian strode over and squatted in front of her. As he moved, the bullets on his body made a tinkling sound. He was wearing a combat uniform and a thick bulletproof vest. His limbs were tied with guns, ammunition, and all kinds of cold weapons. After leaving Werther, he took away all the equipment, guns, ammunition, and bulletproof vests. He was fully armed. He killed his way out of Werther. He led his men and horses and wanted to kill his way out of the fallen area. However, he did not expect to meet a child who was almost attacked on the way. Initially, he was too lazy to care. However, for some reason, he suddenly thought of Xiao Bao. He did not know why, but he saved the child. The child who was saved grabbed him and asked nervously where someone was going. Coincidentally, he was the person the child was looking for. The child said that a young sister came to North Africa to look for him and was now in danger. He asked who it was, but the child could not tell him the name. He only said that it was a very powerful person. He immediately thought of Chu Ho. However, why would she appear here? It was unbelievable. On the way here, he saw a person hanging on a tree branch at the entrance of the factory. He recognized her at a glance. He secretly ambushed and shot a few soldiers. Gu Jinglian looked at Chu Ho nervously. When he saw the wound on her abdomen that was roughly bandaged, he was stunned. "You're injured?" "I'm fine. I was shot." "What about the bullet? Did you take it out?" Take. As Chu Ho spoke, she tried to support her body and stand up. However, she overestimated herself. Just as she stood up, she knelt on the ground due to exhaustion. Gu Jinglian reached out and supported her. Seeing that she was seriously injured, his tone became cold. "Why you here?" "I came to find you." Halfway through his words, Chu Ho could no longer make a sound. His eyelids twitched violently, and he actually fainted. Gu Jinglian caught her nimbly and pulled her into his arms. His face was full of heartache. This stupid woman actually found her way here. Looking for him? He was clearly courting death. He was a little angry. What kind of place was this? It was such a chaotic place, filled with the flames of war, smoke, and endless disputes. Only people wanted to escape, but she actually rushed here rashly. Crazy? His heart ached as he hugged her tightly, as though he was afraid that she would vanish into thin air in his arms. He frowned and said, "Crazy woman. What should we do?" "Lin," she asked anxiously, "will sister be okay?" "Let's go back to the base first and check on her injuries." "Okay." As Lin she spoke, he was about to carry Chu Ho. However, Gu Jinglian was one step ahead of him. He carried Chu Ho with one hand and held a gun with the other, ready to deal with any sudden attack. Chapter 35-45. Lin Shi was shocked. He didn't expect this man to be strong enough to carry a woman with one hand. It was too terrifying. Although Chu Ho was very thin, she was still quite tall. He actually carried her with one hand and his expression didn't change at all. Gu Jinglian carried her and turned around, only to see that Lin Shi was still in a daze. He frowned and said coldly, "Follow me." Lin Shi immediately chased after him. The three of them walked all the way and arrived at a bomb shelter. Gu Jinglian was originally with the main group, but because Lin Shi appeared along the way, he came with him to look for Chu Ho. As a result, they lost contact with the main group. They had originally planned to go to the signal tower to restore the broken signal and then contact for backup. Now that they had parted ways and Chu Ho was injured, Gu Jinglian planned to find a place to hide and treat her wound. It was dark and damp in the bomb shelter. Gu Jinglian placed Chu Ho in a relatively dry place. He turned around and instructed Lin Shi, "Bring the gauze and iodine over." Lin Shi carried Chu Ho's combat bag over. He rummaged through the bag for the iodine and gauze and passed them to Gu Jinglian. Gu Jinglian untied the gauze and checked the wound. There was an obvious gunshot wound on her waist and abdomen. There was a cross on the wound, but there was no bullet shell. The bullet had been removed. Gu Jinglian was very surprised. This cross was probably made by removing the bullet. Who did it? Could it be that she did it herself? How did she do it? A woman actually had such terrifying willpower when she was injured by a gunshot. She could actually remove the bullet by herself. However, because of the circumstances, the wound was not well treated. If it was dragged out, it could easily become infected. Gu Jinglian disinfected the wound with iodine. After cleaning it thoroughly, he stopped the bleeding. He covered the wound with a clean gauze and bandaged it. It was especially painful to clean the wound. Chu Ho woke up from the pain. She hissed and opened her eyes. Her beautiful eyebrows were slightly furrowed. Gu Jinglian glanced at her. "Does it hurt?" Chu Ho nodded and his breathing quickened. "Yes, a little." Gu Jinglian said, "Bear with it." If the wound was not treated properly, it could easily become infected and inflamed. After he bandaged the wound, Chu Ho finally closed his eyes and his breathing gradually stabilized. Gu Jinglian suddenly asked, "Why are you here?" Chu Ho furrowed her brows, but a strange blush appeared on her face. She turned her face away, not looking at his face, and did not say a word for a long time. She had her pride. She could not possibly tell Gu Jinglian that she risked her life to come to such a war-torn area to look for him because she was worried. It was even more impossible for her to say that she was worried that something would happen to him or that Xiao Bao would lose his father. Now that she saw that he was safe, her heart was at ease. Gu Jinglian saw that she did not speak. Her pale face only had a slight blush on it. It was extremely strange. He asked suspiciously, "Are you worried about me?" Chu Ho almost reflexively interrupted him. She said coldly, "Do you think I'm here for you?" Gu Jinglian was speechless. Wasn't that the case? Wasn't her words just giving herself away? Chapter 3546. Chu Ho saw that her words weren't convincing and said expressionlessly, "I came here just to what?" "To play." Gu Jinglian was speechless. Play? Now that the war was raging and most of North Africa had fallen into the flames of war, she came here to play? Gu Jinglian said calmly, "Stubborn." Chu Ho heard this but didn't want to talk to him. She then realized that she was in Gu Jinglian's arms and they were very close to each other. The intimacy between the two of them was unreasonable and she was instantly alarmed. "You don't have to hug me." "Oh." Gu Jinglian didn't say anything else and let go of her. Chu Ho fell to the ground and stretched her wound, causing her to frown in pain. Lin Shi immediately rushed over anxiously and said to Gu Jinglian angrily, "Hey! Why aren't you gentlemanly at all? Sister is injured." Gu Jinglian said calmly, "She said she didn't want me to hug her." Lin Shishan added, "Women always say one thing and mean another. She might say she doesn't want you to hug her, but she probably wants you to hug her." Chu Ho couldn't take it anymore. She grimaced and said, "I didn't say that." Lin Shi pouted and hurriedly asked worriedly, "Sister, are you all right? Does your wound hurt?" Chu Ho groaned and said angrily, "It doesn't hurt." Gu Jinglian glanced at her lightly and pulled her into his arms again. Chu Ho struggled a little unnaturally, but Gu Jinglian's voice became gentler. He patted her back gently and said calmly, "All right, stop talking." Chu Ho stopped talking. "Don't worry. Go to sleep." Gu Jinglian said again, "Have a good sleep. We'll continue our journey when we wake up." She nodded and suddenly asked curiously, "Where are we going?" Chu Ho asked curiously, "How are we going to leave later? How do we leave North Africa?" "There is a signal base station more than 10 miles away from here. My men and I have agreed to meet at the signal tower. When the signal is restored, we will contact my rescue team stationed in North Africa. By then, we will be able to leave this place." When Chu Ho heard this, he grunted and closed his eyes. She was really tired, so she fell asleep immediately. Gu Jinglian couldn't help but smile when he heard her breathing. He lowered his eyes and gently planted a kiss on her forehead. How could he not know why Chu Ho had come? Although she was stubborn and did not mean what she said, for a woman who did not hesitate to brave the flames of war to come to North Africa and get injured all over, who did she do it for? However, even though she was stubborn and refused to say anything, he was kind enough to not expose her. Lin Shi also found a place to lie down. After going through so many things, he was already extremely tired, so he quickly fell asleep. Gu Jinglian also closed his eyes. The air raid shelter was very remote. Moreover, before entering the shelter, He had deliberately buried landmines at the entrance. If an enemy entered, it would definitely trigger the mechanism, giving him a lot of time to react. Gu Jinglian hugged Chu Ho tightly and also fell asleep. The three of them curled up in the air raid shelter. When Chu Ho woke up again, the sky outside the shelter was gradually darkening. Chapter 35-47. When she opened her eyes, she saw Gu Jinglian's head resting gently on her shoulder. His warm breath kept brushing against her cheeks. For a moment, she felt as if all the air that entered her lungs was coming from him. The breath that he exhaled seemed to be slightly hot. She only felt that her face was suddenly burning red. Instinctively, she pushed him, but his body did not move. He hugged her so tightly that she had the illusion that she was his most precious treasure. Chu Ho's expression became more and more unnatural. She saw that Gu Jinglian's breathing was heavy. It was probably because he had been too tired in the past few days that he fell into a deep sleep. She did not know when he had fallen asleep, so she could not bear to wake him up. Chu Ho closed her eyes and planned to rest for a while more. Suddenly, there was a shocking explosion at the entrance of the cave. The ear-piercing sound was deafening. Her ears were suddenly ringing from the explosion. Gu Jinglian also woke up instantly. He raised his head and heard a soft rustling sound coming from the entrance of the cave. Someone's coming. Chu Ho also reacted. She immediately stood up, picked up the submachine gun from the ground, and crouched in the corner. Gu Jinglian covered the entrance of the cave and held his breath vigilantly. However, the soft rustling sound outside the cave suddenly went far away. They did not seem to have noticed the entrance of the cave that was covered by the bushes. Immediately after, they heard the rumbling sound of tanks passing by outside the cave. Chu Ho carefully walked to the entrance of the cave. She pushed the bushes aside and looked outside. However, she saw several helicopters hovering in the sky above the coconut grove. The fog was thick, and visibility was extremely low. The huge leaf fans were making a desperate sound. "We should go." Gu Jinglian said, "Let's go now." Chu Ho nodded. Gu Jinglian asked nervously, "Can you walk on your own?" "I'm fine." After sleeping for a few hours, the pain of the wound had subsided a lot. She walked over and carried the combat bag. Gu Jinglian walked over, woke Lin Shi up, and gave him a gun. If they left this place, they might be ambushed by the rebel army at any time. It was impossible for him to carry him, so he could only do his best to cover him. However, even if he was a child, he still needed to carry a weapon with him under such circumstances. But Lin Shi said, "It's okay, I know how to use a gun." Growing up in such an environment, he knew how to use guns and basic self-defense. Gu Jinglian gave him a few more magazines. Lin Shi kept the magazines close to his body, and the three of them left the cave. Just as they walked out of the cave, the loud sound suddenly became clearer. Bullets rained down in front of him. Gu Jinglian covered Lin Shi while Chu Ho followed behind him. One of them charged forward while the other had his back to Gu Jinglian to observe the situation behind them and provide cover. The three of them ran wildly in the rain of bullets. The clamor was accompanied by the sound of AK shots, and the tragic sound of gunfire reverberated in their eardrums. Gu Jinglian gave the only helmet to Lin Shi. 3 heavy bullets hung on his shoulders, 3 guns on his back, and a heavy Gatling gun in his hands. He ran at the front to open up a path. His pace was calm and fast. He turned back to estimate the distance and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Fire!" Chapter 35-48. The two of them cooperated well. At this moment, someone seemed to have discovered their deliberate trail, so they threw an infrared time grenade at them. Chu Ho saw it at a glance. This grenade took about 10 seconds to detonate. Chu Ho immediately walked over and kicked the grenade away. Gu Jinglian raised his AK-47 and fired a bullet, directly detonating the grenade. Chu Ho turned around and pushed Lin Shi to the ground. A scorching wave rushed over and brushed past their backs. Behind them, a huge cluster of flames rose, accompanied by heart-wrenching screams. It formed a towering wall of fire about 100 meters long in the coconut forest. Chu Ho struggled to support her body. She turned her head and glanced back. She saw several tanks passing through the ferocious fire and slowly approaching. The wave of air swept over violently. The tanks crossed the line of fire, and more than a dozen soldiers rushed down. Gu Jinglian had a long string of bullets on his shoulder, and his face was covered in sweat. He carried the extremely heavy Gatling gun and fired fiercely at the team behind him. Chu Ho held the XM-109 sniper rifle, and blood-white hot liquid sprayed endlessly at the edge of the forest. She didn't know how many people she had shot, but she vaguely felt that she had returned to her former mercenary career. As long as there was a bullet left, she would continue to slaughter lives. Several laser beams quickly scanned the forest. These were special instruments to detect life and electronic equipment. Gu Jinglian recognized them immediately. He gritted his teeth, nimbly turned over, and pulled off all the radio communication equipment on himself and Chu Ho, and threw them into the distance. The laser beam's positioning was messy. With a boom, a guided missile hit the position where the radio was thrown. Gu Jinglian grabbed Chu Ho's hand. Chu Ho directly hugged Lin Shi in her arms and rushed into the forest, temporarily obtaining cover. Chu Ho felt for the straw in her collar and hurriedly drank 2 mouthfuls of water. There wasn't much water stored in her jacket. She didn't even have time to add purification powder. The smell of water made her retch. But in this situation, there was no time to care so much. We're still 10 miles away from the signal tower. Gu Jinglian paused for a moment. The signal base station was built by Werther, so it's very safe. The communication equipment inside is more complete. After we go in, we'll send out a signal and shield the surroundings. We'll be temporarily protected. Expressionlessly, He shook out the contents of her backpack and handed the energy bars and night vision goggles to Gu Jinglian. She then threw the AK and RPG-7B quiver on her back in front of him and began to swiftly load the Gatling gun with ammunition. Gu Jinglian broke off a piece of energy bar and stuffed it into his mouth. He mixed it with his saliva and quickly strapped his AK and rocket launcher to his shoulder. The atmosphere instantly became heavy. He looked at Chu Ho in front of him and his hands froze. His eyebrows gradually became heavy. The odds are against us. Gu Jinglian said, "You also know that this place is surrounded by the rebel army. At this critical moment, I'll cover you. You leave first." Chu Ho raised her face, twitched the corner of her lips, threw the water bottle to Silver Fox, and quickly got up. "Listen, Gu Jinglian, we're together. If we want to leave, we'll leave together." Gu Jinglian didn't say anything. He knew, and Chu Ho probably also understood, that the current situation wasn't optimistic. Gu Jinglian wanted to protect her, even at the cost of his life. Chapter 3549. Seeing that he was silent, Chu Ho's face darkened. She grabbed his chin and squeezed it tightly. "Listen up. Either we leave North Africa together, or we die together. There are no other options." Gu Jinglian looked up. His eyes flickered and his lips suddenly curved. "You won't regret it?" This woman was actually willing to risk her life with him. In such a dangerous environment, she said that she would either leave with him or die together. Was she really not afraid? Of course. "From the moment I decided to step on the cargo ship to North Africa, I won't regret it." Gu Jinglian also stood up and stared at her for a long time. Seeing that he kept staring at her, Chu Ho couldn't help but take half a step back. She said guiltily, "What are you doing?" "So you admit it." Gu Jinglian said this without rhyme or reason. Chu Ho frowned. She didn't understand what he was trying to say. "What do you mean? You admit that you came to North Africa because you were worried about me." When Chu Ho heard this, her face immediately flushed red. She clenched her fists. Before she could refute, Gu Jinglian suddenly took a step forward and hugged her tightly with his right hand. He clasped the back of her neck and kissed her deeply. Lin Shi inadvertently saw this intimate scene. Her face immediately turned red and she immediately covered her face with both hands. It was not suitable for children. See no evil, hear no evil. Chu Ho wanted to push him away, but Gu Jinglian held her tightly. The more she struggled, the deeper she sank into his arms. Gu Jinglian kissed her until she was about to suffocate. He then released her, but he still wanted more and pecked her blushing face. Chu Ho's face became even hotter. She wanted to rebuke him, but she couldn't say a word for a long time. "Okay, don't waste time. Gu Jinglian turned the bag over and all the equipment fell to the ground at once. When Chu Ho heard this, anger rose in her heart. What did he mean by don't waste time? He was clearly the one who kissed her. And he still had the cheek to tell her not to waste time. She was about to explode when Gu Jinglian handed her a gun. A charming smile appeared on his handsome face that was stained with dust. Let's kill our way out. Chu Ho immediately laughed. She took the gun from him and tied it to her waist. At this moment, the winds of war in the west and artillery fire spread. Thick smoke billowed from the coconut grove, and flames flickered. The HU-5 grenade exploded with a huge shockwave. The earth shook, and the aura of death once again gathered around the land. The tank rumbled past the ruins, the wreckage, and the shadows of the trees. The helicopter hovered in the air, and several white signal lights swept through the forest. Chu He carefully hunched her back and snuck into the forest alone. The thorns mercilessly slashed across her cheeks, causing blood to gush out of the wounds. She hugged a Barrett M99 sniper rifle. Her footsteps were steady, her expression was cold, and her face was covered in dust. She leaned against a hidden tree and squatted down. She took out a straw from her collar and drank the last mouthful of water stored in her jacket. Her lips were still pale and dry. Although she was wearing a bulletproof vest over her camouflage uniform, her beautiful figure was still exposed. Chapter 3550. Gu Jinglian and Lin Shi followed closely behind her. They leaned against the barrier and raised their hands to wipe away the blood and dirt on their faces. Chu Ho looked at him. Gu Jinglian's hair was messed up in the wind, and his handsome face was ravaged by the wind. Beneath his handsome eyebrows was a pair of seductive peach blossom eyes. Time ticked by. Chu Ho rested for a while before turning around and crouching behind a tree. She raised the heavy sniper rifle in her hand and aimed accurately at the lens. She slowly narrowed one eye and focused all her attention on the sniper scope. She held her breath and waited calmly. She counted silently in her heart. Suddenly, Chu Ho pulled the trigger. The rapid ammunition detonated the improvised explosive device that had been deployed earlier. With a loud bang, a tank was blocked 100 meters away from the wall of fire. Chu Ho slung the sniper rifle over her shoulder and injected the last dose of adrenaline. She pulled out a military-grade dagger and ran toward the tank. Gu Jinglian quickly followed. An M1A1 tank was parked quietly in place. At that moment, a nimble figure silently snuck behind the tank and opened the door to the combat room. The soldier in the combat room didn't even have time to see who it was before he was punched in the head. Before he could react, a strong arm picked up his tottering body and twirled the dagger in the soldier's hand. The poor man felt a chill in his throat and hot blood sprayed onto the passenger seat. The stench of blood assailed his nostrils. Chu Ho quickly used the same method to sneak into the engine room, leaving behind a collapsed corpse and a messy cabin. She crept toward the cockpit. Zaifi! Zaifi! There's an affair! Zaifi, please answer if you hear me. Please answer if you hear me. Zaifi, quickly lock onto the target. A man's standard English voice rang out from the cockpit of the tank. However, there was an eerie silence in the cabin. No one answered. A sturdy combat boot stepped on a corpse that was gradually turning cold. Chu Ho lifted his cold face. Blood was flowing from the dagger in front of him. She wiped away the blood that had splattered on her face, and her eyes revealed a ferocious look. She kicked away the corpse that was in the way and cut off the radio communication. The noise stopped abruptly, and the cabin returned to silence. She was very familiar with the operation of the tank. In just a few seconds, Chu Ho quickly adapted to the operation of the M1A1. Gu Jinglian also got into the tank. One person was in charge of setting up the tank, while the other was in charge of the turret. She skillfully pushed the joystick and cut into the order, her cold eyes surging like a storm. Zaifi! Please answer if you hear me. Please answer if you hear me. In the cockpit of another tank, a man with chestnut hair shouted at the top of his lungs. He cursed as he gasped for breath, the veins on his forehead bulging. The burly man was sweating profusely as an inexplicable uneasiness rose in his heart. In that breathtaking moment, a beam of fire whistled through the air. The man with chestnut hair only felt the cabin shake violently. He was so shocked that he fell back into his seat. This shot had fatally struck the main turret of the tank, and the core of the attack had been accurately destroyed. Chapter 35:51. Chu Ho held the joystick with both hands, and her gaze was domineering. Gu Jinglian controlled the turret and kept attacking the target. Under the attack of the artillery, the target tank crashed into a tree trunk and flipped over. You drove the tank well. Gu Jinglian rarely praised. Chu Ho also said, your aim is not bad. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. At such a dangerous moment, the two of them could still talk and laugh so easily. Chu Ho said, I've driven tanks, nuclear submarines, and armored vehicles before. Gu Jinglian said, this is the first time in my life that I've driven a tank. But I saw that you were so familiar with it that I thought you had experience. I'm just learning now. The two of them reached a safe area and found Lin Shi. Chu Ho drove the tank until they were outside the battlefield. There was an armored vehicle parked by the side of the road. When the lights came on, there was someone inside. Chu Ho used the same trick again and sneaked into the armored vehicle. After killing the soldiers who had let down their guard, Gu Jinglian got into the car with Lin Shi. She drove the armored vehicle, and the three of them sped towards the signal base station. The night was dark, and dark clouds covered the moon. The hazy light and shadow shone into the abandoned signal tower, making it look like a lonely city. The three of them rushed to the signal base station, but Gu Jinglian did not see anyone else. He walked into the signal base station, but there was no one inside. Gu Jinglian's eyes darkened, but he had already guessed that the team that was separated from him was probably dead. After all, having too many people would be a burden. That team was not made up of elite soldiers. There were many engineers and higher-ups in it. They did not have the strength to truss a chicken and could not even shoot accurately. It was indeed difficult to break out of the encirclement with so many people. If it were not for Chu Ho, he would not have been able to kill his way out on his own. After all, war was merciless. No one had an absolute halo, and deaths and injuries were inevitable. Chu Ho also expected that those people had probably died in the battlefield, but she heard Gu Jinglian say, we don't have engineers. The signal may not be able to be repaired. It's all right. Chu Ho smiled and walked to the dashboard. He opened the hidden door and looked at the circuit inside. Find the toolbox. I'll give it a try. You can? Chu Ho's reply was concise and comprehensive. Gu Jinglian and Lin Shi immediately split up to look for the toolbox. They finally found it in the cupboard. In the sky far away, the smoke of gunpowder gradually spread out, and the clamor of firearms gradually came to an end. 8,000 meters away from the coconut grove, a well-equipped, fully armed team was rapidly closing in on the signal tower. Max, lead the 7th Division and surround the signal tower in the north. Storm, you and the 9th Division will break through the encirclement with me. A man in a camouflage uniform was crawling in front of the broken wall. He was the leader of the entire team. The man turned around and ordered his men with a serious expression. He said solemnly, we just received news that a suspected government spy has sneaked into the war zone and is heading towards the signal tower. We have to surround them and eliminate the spy. A group of Special Forces soldiers holding Browning M2 machine guns nodded quietly. Soon, the lighthouse let out an alarm that resounded through the sky. Beams of signal beams crisscrossed and rotated in the sky. The man calmly waved his hand and said in a low voice, charge. Chapter 35:52. The leader held his head high and led the elite division to the north of the lighthouse. At this moment, a sniper rifle shot rang out, and Max fell to the ground with a thud. His head had been accurately blown off. The bullet was too powerful and seemed to have been carefully modified. Poor D, whose head was a bloody mess. It was too horrible to look at. The leader was stunned. However, in the next moment, a fireball whizzed towards the 7th Division like a meteor with a thick tail of smoke behind it. The leader of the division roared in grief and indignation. Following a loud explosion, miserable howls of pain could be heard. The Apira's rocket launcher had overturned the entire 7th Division, and an earth-shattering shockwave swept over them. Then, a cold voice echoed through the loudspeaker in the silent night. I'm warning you. No matter whose unit you're from, retreat 5 miles away immediately. Otherwise, I won't show any mercy." The cold and arrogant voice reverberated in the ruins. The man looked around cautiously, but he could not see anyone. The voice said again, "Hey, I'm up there." The man looked up and saw Chu Ho with her black hair dancing in the wind. She stood proudly at the top of the lighthouse with her arms crossed. Behind her, signal beams crisscrossed and overlapped. The strong wind lifted the coat tied around her waist. She looked valiant. Chu Ho's expression was arrogant. Her slim figure was like a phantom from the Azura Palace, cold and heartless. She gently stroked the modified Barrett M99 sniper rifle in her arms. From time to time, she tilted her head and opened the scope to aim at the leader's head. She smiled eerily and said, "If you want to go to hell, I don't mind you taking one step closer." The man's expression changed. Panic flashed through his eyes. The group of special forces also panicked. They stood still and did not dare to act rashly. The leader raised the loudspeaker and said sternly, "Are you spies sent by the government? If you hand over the information in your hands now, we'll let you live immediately." Chu Ho raised her eyebrows and said sarcastically, "Oh, looks like there's a misunderstanding. I'm not a spy." "Those casualties in the battle zone, were they your doing?" "Yes." Chu Ho admitted, "It was you rebels who wanted to kill me for no reason. I was just trying to protect myself." The leader's face turned cold and a chill ran down his spine. An army of more than 100 people had been completely annihilated by this seemingly weak woman. Who is she? "So many of our brothers have been killed by you. This blood debt must be paid." Chu Ho sneered and said slowly, "Our people have also died in the hands of your soldiers. So many innocent civilians have suffered heavy casualties. If that's the case, then we're on good terms." Hearing this, the leader was so shocked that he took a deep breath, and his eyes widened in anger. Chu Ho pointed at his head and snorted disdainfully. He casually sat down on the edge of the pagoda, his posture free and unrestrained. "I'm going to count down from 10 seconds. If you don't retreat, I can't guarantee what I'll do." 10. Chu Ho was very beautiful. She was so beautiful that she was enchanting and breathtaking. The wind at the top of the pagoda was very strong. It messed up her hair, making it look especially messy. Chu Ho held the loudspeaker and raised her eyebrows with a cold smile as she counted down, 9, 8. The man was so angry that he gritted his teeth and held his breath for a long time. Chapter 35:53. So many people have died in her hands. It seems that this woman is not simple. If we act rashly, so many people might die in her hands. 6, 5. As Chu Ho counted, she held the sniper rifle in her hands even tighter. Her forehead was covered in cold sweat. "Give the order, Captain." The leader clenched his fists tightly. There was unwillingness and shame in his eyes. After hesitating for a few seconds, he gritted his teeth and said, "Retreat." In the team, a hoarse voice rang out, "Retreat! Retreat!" The team immediately retreated until they were more than 1,000 meters away. Chu Ho confirmed that the team had left through the sniper scope. She collapsed on the ground and leaned against the wall, trembling all over. This empty fort strategy had finally fooled these people. In fact, in the current situation, Chu Ho and Gu Jinglian had no more ammunition on them. The RPG rocket launcher just now was their last weapon. It could be said that they had run out of ammunition all the way to the signal tower. As they left the battlefield, Chu Ho could clearly feel that there were troops following behind them, chasing them all the way. However, they did not have any ammunition. In front of such a fully armed troop, they had lost all their strength. In ancient times, when the enemy was outnumbered, they lacked preparation. They deliberately showed that they did not have any troops, causing the illusion that there was an ambush and causing them to retreat in fear. In the era of the Three Kingdoms, Sima Yi's army approached the west side of the city. Zhuge Liang did not have any troops to resist, but he opened the city gate and played the zither on the city tower. Sima Yi suspected that there was an ambush, so he immediately retreated. This was the origin of the empty fort strategy. However, Chu Ho did not expect that at the last moment, she would use the empty fort strategy to scare off these soldiers. Just now, when they were counting down, she was more nervous than anyone else. She was worried that these people would not be deceived and would directly attack. They would be captured before they could even wait for help. Being captured was an ideal situation. If they were treated as spies and had their throats slit, then the three of them would really not be able to return. Gu Jinglian climbed to the top of the tower and saw Chu Ho leaning against the wall with a frightened look. He walked over, hugged her, and gently stroked her hair. He laughed and said, "So there are times when you are afraid of death." "I'm not afraid of death." Chu Ho clenched his fists. "I'm afraid that Xiao Bao will lose us." Gu Jinglian was stunned. He held her shoulders stiffly and comforted her gently. "It's okay. It's all in the past. Chu Ho, let's go home." "Yeah, let's go home. Xiao Bao is still waiting for us." Gu Jinglian curled his lips and smiled at her, only to find that Chu Ho's eyes were filled with tears. She was deeply touched. He kissed her once again. It was a kiss from the brink of death. It was short but warm. An FC-1 Valiant Dragon aircraft pierced through the clouds and arrived. Gu Jinglian carried Lin Shi and boarded the plane. Chu Ho clung onto the handrail of the cabin. The strands of hair in front of his forehead danced in the wind, occasionally pricking his eyelids, but it did not hurt or itch. She pursed her thin lips tightly and suddenly frowned as she looked back. The sky in the distance was gradually turning white. The beautiful sunrise that she had been looking forward to finally appeared in front of her eyes. 8,000 meters away, smoke rose in spirals above the coconut grove. That was the place where she and Gu Jinglian had fought their last battle. It was hard to imagine that the two of them, alone with a child, had actually fought their way out. Chapter 35-54. Chu He let out a sudden laugh and nimbly boarded the plane. Her back view was stiff and firm. 2 days later, the evacuation fleet docked at the harbor. Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho brought Lin Shi to line up and get ready to board the ship. When the fleet reached them, they were stopped. Who is this child? Because he did not have a passport, and because there were restrictions on the number of people who could evacuate, the fleet had to stop under fire. There was a limit to the capacity, and non-nationals were not allowed to board the ship. Lin Shi suddenly became nervous and pinched the corner of his shirt. How could he forget? He was born in North Africa. To be precise, he did not have a passport. But his father and mother did. Initially, his father and mother wanted to take him away from here. However, things happened later. His father and mother were no longer around, and he lost the right to board the ship. Lin Shi's face suddenly looked lonely. Chu Ho hugged him tightly and said to the person in charge of the embassy, "This is my son." "Your son?" "Yes. His father and I came to North Africa to do business. Our son was born in North Africa. During this war, we plan to bring our son back to develop his career." "Why is there a problem?" Gu Jinglian said, "This is our son, Gu Lin Shi. He doesn't have a passport, but this is a special case. Please make an exception." Lin Shi was stunned. He looked up at Chu Ho and Gu Jinglian in disbelief. The warmth in his heart instantly overwhelmed him. "All right, let's board the ship." Gu Jinglian held the back of his head and said, "Lin Shi, aren't you going to thank Uncle?" "Thank you." Lin Shi thanked him obediently, and the three of them finally boarded the ship. Generally speaking, because there were a lot of people in the evacuation fleet, many beds had to be empty. Usually, a bed that could fit one person was not allowed to sleep on it. Only 3 people were allowed to sit on it. This way, 3 people could be squeezed in. However, Chu Ho was too tired. The 3 of them were very tired, especially Lin Shi. After all, he was a child and his physical strength was limited. Somehow, Gu Jinglian managed to get the crew to arrange a single room for them. There were 2 beds in the room, and the 3 of them had to make do for a few nights. Returning to the capital from North Africa, they needed to dock at Victoria Harbor. On the ship, Gu Jinglian called Uncle Fu and informed him that the 3 of them had safely boarded the fleet to return to China. Uncle Fu cried tears of joy. "Master, where is Chu Ho?" "Chu Ho is fine. He's only slightly injured." "Is it serious?" "It's a little serious, but for now, we can only hold on until we return home." Uncle Fu was worried, but he was also happy. For the past few nights, he had been unable to sleep. He tossed and turned in bed because he was worried that Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho had met with an accident in North Africa. If something happened to Chu Ho while he was searching for Gu Jinglian, he would definitely blame himself to death. He didn't know how to explain this to Xiao Bao. He had been hiding this matter from Xiao Bao from the beginning to the end. However, now that Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho had returned safely, he had finally gotten rid of one of his worries. Master, please take good care of Chu Ho. After all, she suffered a lot in order to find you. I don't need you to teach me. I will take good care of my woman. You don't need to worry about it. When Uncle Fu heard this, he still used Gu Jinglian's usual arrogant tone. However, he did not feel wronged at all. Instead, he felt gratified. Master finally knew how to take care of people. Chapter 35-55. By the time Gu Jinglian returned to the cabin, Chu Ho was already asleep. However, she had to sleep on her stomach to avoid touching the wound because of the injury on her back. She gently covered himself with the blanket. Gu Jinglian sat on the bed. Seeing that She was so sensible, he suddenly asked, "What do you plan to do after you return to China?" The teenager was stunned when he heard this. He did not speak. He did not have his parents, and he did not have a home. Even if he returned to China, he did not know where to go. Gu Jinglian saw his hesitant expression and asked, "How about being my son?" Shi's eyes widened when he heard this. He was so embarrassed that he did not know what to do. You don't have to call me Dad. It's just that you don't have a home, so I can't just watch you be sent to the welfare home." Gu Jinglian continued, "After we return to China, I will go through the adoption procedures. I will adopt you, raise you, and provide for your education. How about that?" He sounded as if he was negotiating with him. It was obvious that he respected his opinion. However, She was even more hesitant. "Is that okay? Won't it be too much trouble for you? I don't want to burden you." She was very sensible. Naturally, he was worried that it would cause trouble for Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho. He had heard them casually mention that they already had a son. If they raised him, would it cause trouble? However, Gu Jinglian laughed. He had never mentioned his background to this child, and She did not know much about the Gu family. Even if he raised 100 children, he would not feel any burden at all, let alone one. Gu Jinglian said, "Don't worry as long as you are willing." She nodded slowly and said, "Yes, I am willing. However, I will work hard in my studies. The money for my studies and living expenses will be a loan from you. When I grow up and have a job, I will return it to you." His childish words made Gu Jinglian laugh. He waved his hand and said, "Come here." She walked over. Gu Jinglian held him in his arms and helped him lie down on the bed. He said, "Go to sleep." As he spoke, he covered him with the blanket. She asked in surprise, "Uncle, aren't you going to sleep?" "I'm not tired." She pursed his lips and did not force him to sleep. He was indeed so tired that he fell asleep as soon as he closed his eyes. Gu Jinglian's expression darkened as he looked at his sleeping face. However, he was conflicted about Gong Fan's matter. That child looked identical to the Mu family's Yun Tianyu. That was a long time ago. He heard that Mu Yaja had lost his beloved son in an accident. Although this matter was not made public, she was, after all, in the same circle as him. As far as he knew, the woman had yet to walk out of the trauma of losing Yu to this day. Gu Jinglian became even more suspicious. Gu Jinglian leaned gently against the wall and closed his eyes to rest. After 3 days and 3 nights of drifting on the sea, they finally reached Victoria Harbor 4 days later. Uncle Fu and Xiao Bao were already waiting for them at the harbor early in the morning. Chapter 35-56. Chu Ho only felt a black shadow pouncing on her. It was only when Xiao Bao pounced into her arms that she realized that this black shadow was the little guy she had been thinking about day and night. "Mom, you're finally back. I missed you so much." Xiao Bao didn't know that Chu Ho was injured. When he pounced on her, it affected her wound. Chu Ho frowned in pain and endured it. Gu Jinglian suddenly grabbed Xiao Bao's ear and said fiercely, "Your mom is injured. Take it easy." He was still as simple and violent as before, not showing any mercy to his own son. Xiao Bao grimaced in pain and howled. However, when he heard Gu Jinglian say that Chu Ho was injured, he suddenly became nervous. Mom is injured? Xiao Bao said and wanted to check. However, Chu Ho stopped him. She pressed his head and said, "It's okay. Just don't cause any more trouble. Just don't cause any more trouble. Just don't cause any more trouble." These words of indifference kept magnifying in his mind. Xiao Bao poked his fingers aggrievedly. He turned his head and suddenly saw Lin Shi in Gu Jinglian's arms. This unfamiliar boy who was a few years older than him was stunned. He was a little jealous. Dad had never hugged him like this before. As a result, Xiao Bao looked at Lin Shi with unconcealable hostility. Gu Jinglian put Lin Shi down. Lin Shi shrank behind Chu Ho uneasily. Chu Ho saw the hostility in Xiao Bao's eyes, so she said to Xiao Bao, I want to discuss something with you. She squatted down with difficulty and pulled Lin Shi in front of Xiao Bao. She said, "His name is Lin Shi. From now on, he'll be your brother, okay?" "What do you mean?" "Mom went to North Africa to look for your dad and encountered danger on the way. It was this little brother who saved Mom. However, it's a pity." Chu Ho frowned and said, "Little brother's parents met with an accident in North Africa. After he returned to China, he was homeless, so Dad and Mom decided to adopt him." At first, Xiao Bao was still a little conflicted when he heard that he was going to adopt an unfamiliar child. However, after hearing that this young man had saved his mother and father, Xiao Bao's face suddenly became hesitant. No matter what, he was very grateful for saving his mother. But, Xiao Bao asked carefully, if Mom adopts him, will she not love Xiao Bao anymore? How could this be? Chu Ho rubbed his chubby little face and said reproachfully, "Xiao Bao, you're so stupid. Why would you think that? Think about it, Mom and Dad won't stop loving you. Instead, you'll have a little brother who loves you." Lin Shi also gathered his courage and said, I will definitely be a good brother." He was too nervous and wanted to perform well. Therefore, he was stuttering when he spoke. As Lin Shi spoke, he nervously extended his hand. His palm was wet with cold sweat. He had heard from Chu Ho that she had a 6-year-old child, so he desperately wanted to get Xiao Bao's acknowledgement. Xiao Bao looked at Lin Shi's outstretched hand, then looked at Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho. Finally, his gaze fell on Lin Shi's sincere face. Seeing that he was so nervous that his lips were trembling, he felt his heart ache for him. He did not hold Lin Shi's hand. Instead, he walked forward and hugged him gently, giving him a friendly hug. Chapter 35:57. He thanked him sincerely. At the same time, Xiao Bao smiled and said, "However, from now on, you're my older brother. As your younger brother, I'll take good care of you too." Lin Shi was a little surprised. He did not expect Xiao Bao to accept him as an outsider so easily, let alone say such heartwarming words like, "I'll take good care of you too." However, to Xiao Bao, although Lin Shi was a stranger, he did not have the ability to do so. This little brother had saved his father and mother for him. This kind of life-saving grace was too precious. "You don't have a home anymore, so the Gu family is your home," Xiao Bao said. For some reason, Lin Shi, who was so stubborn that he refused to shed a single tear even in the face of such a ferocious rebel army, actually shed tears because of this sentence. After returning to the Gu family, Gu Jinglian immediately called for the doctor to check on Chu Ho's injuries. The wound was infected and inflamed. In such a harsh and complicated environment, even if the wound was properly bandaged, applied medicine, and disinfected, due to the fighting along the way, the originally bandaged wound showed signs of healing. However, due to the violent movements, it was torn open, healed, and torn open again. This repeated over and over again, and in addition to the environment, it was inflamed. Fortunately, it was not too serious. It was just a little festering and pus. It was a pity that this place would be scarred. However, Chu Ho had so many injuries on his body that one more would not make a difference. There were several gunshot wounds on her body, and this was probably the lightest one. Gu Jinglian had specially instructed Chu Ho to do a full-body checkup. Chu Ho did a full-body checkup. He remembered that during one of the explosions, the strong shockwave had directly flipped them over. Gu Jinglian was not too far away from the impact, but Chu Ho was sent flying back to the tree trunk. He did not know if his tendons and bones were injured. The doctor touched his tendons and bones. After asking, Chu Ho also said that he did not feel any injuries. Hence, at least his tendons and bones were not injured. Gu Jinglian was relieved. Xiao Bao did not know what was going on. Only after Uncle Fu explained again and again did he understand. It turned out that his father was stuck in North Africa because of work. His mother was worried and rushed to North Africa. The two met on the way and returned together. Fortunately, both of them were fine. However, Gu Jinglian knew very well that if it weren't for Chu Ho's tacit cooperation, he probably wouldn't have been able to get out of North Africa in a short time. And this was the most optimistic scenario. With Chu Ho's injuries, he probably wouldn't be able to get out of bed for at least half a month. She applied the medicine and lay down. The doctor examined Lin Shi and Gu Jinglian again. Gu Jinglian only suffered some superficial injuries. In the end, it was nothing more than a dislocated ankle, but he reconnected it himself. The doctor repositioned it for him. Other than that, he was fine. Lin Shi suffered more injuries, but most of them were superficial wounds and not too serious. The trip to North Africa was a thrilling one. Fortunately, they were safe. However, during the half a month that Chu Ho was bedridden, Uncle Fu discovered something very strange. His master actually knew how to take care of someone. During the half a month that Chu Ho was bedridden, it was difficult for her to move around. She could not sit up very well. Occasionally, she would turn around and need someone to carry her. Chapter 35-58. Now that he was bent on recuperating, he could not be too reckless. He had to be careful in everything he did to avoid affecting his wound. Uncle Fu originally wanted to hire a nurse, but Gu Jinglian rejected it. When he asked for the reason, he refused to say anything. It was only when he passed by the room in the middle of the night that Uncle Fu saw Gu Jinglian turning over with Chu Ho in his arms through the crack in the door that he suddenly understood. It turned out that the old master was worried that the nurse would be clumsy and wanted to take care of him personally. Gu Jinglian usually did not do any chores. Other than work and the Gu group's matters, he was like a shopkeeper who did not care about anything else. Not to mention taking care of an injured person, he would not even know how to wash the dishes. He did not do any chores and had never served anyone like this before. However, in the past half a month when Chu Ho was bedridden, Gu Jinglian had been taking care of him. Chu Ho was also very surprised. She did not expect that Gu Jinglian seemed to have changed a lot after returning from North Africa. Even when facing her, Gu Jinglian still had his usual arrogant and cold face. However, he would accede to her every request. He even tried to wash her face and peel an apple himself. The scary thing was that when it came to taking care of people, he could not do anything else except peel an apple. He actually used a military knife to peel it, and the skin did not even break. How valiant! It was also an eye-opener for her. Gu Jinglian asked Uncle Fu to investigate a matter. Uncle Fu thought that it was something important, but he did not expect Gu Jinglian to ask him to investigate Mu Yaja's son, Yun Tianyu. Master, why are you suddenly asking about this child? This child, Uncle Fu sighed as he spoke. This child is Yun Shishir's sore spot. Yes. Do you have a photo of Yun Tianyu? Uncle Fu shook his head when he heard this. But I have a photo of Mu Yichen, Mu Yaja's eldest son. He and Yun Tianyu are twins, and they look exactly the same. Master, I'm a little curious. Why are you suddenly asking about this child? Because, Gu Jinglian said faintly, I met him in North Africa. Uncle Fu hesitated for a moment before his expression changed. Could it be Yun Tianyu? Gong Fan. Gong Fan? You should know about the Hurricane Group. Gu Jinglian paused for a moment before continuing. It was Hurricane Group that took over Wedded. I saw a child who looked exactly like Yun Tianyu in North Africa, but his name isn't Tianyu. His name is Gong Fan. This, Uncle Fu was also speechless. He felt very strange. Yun Tianyu was indeed no longer around. Even after so long, Mu Yaja and Yun Shishir still could not walk out of the shadow. Yun Shishir, in particular, was still very upset. Yun Tianyu's name could not be mentioned at all. It was Yun Shishir's biggest pain in her heart. Uncle Fu asked hesitantly, Master, are you sure? A dead person can't be brought back to life. Are you sure you're not mistaken? Gu Jinglian was also a little hesitant. He was also a little skeptical. Do you think there are two people who look exactly the same in this world? Chapter 35:59. Gu Jinglian furrowed his brows. But what? Uncle Fu said, it's just that it's impossible to say that they look like they're made from the same mold. Even if they're twins, they look different. Gu Jinglian furrowed his brows slightly but did not say anything. Forget it. There's no need to get involved in the Mu family's matters. This is their family matter. Uncle Fu sized him up and suddenly said carefully, Old Master, ever since you came back from North Africa, I've noticed that you've changed a lot. How have I changed? You've become gentler. Uncle Fu smiled and observed his expression as he said, When I passed by Chu Ho's room earlier, I saw you taking care of her so attentively. This is the first time I've noticed that you know how to take care of. Before he could finish his sentence, Uncle Fu saw the obvious displeasure on Gu Jinglian's face and immediately corrected himself awkwardly. Take care of. Gu Jinglian's expression softened a little. Uncle Fu then continued, Old Master would never lower himself to take care of someone in the past. This time, I feel that Old Master and Chu Ho's relationship has improved a lot. Why else would they say that a friend in need is a friend indeed? After all, he had gone through a life-and-death situation. Compared to the tit-for-tat between the two of them, it was indeed different. Gu Jinglian gave him a cold sidelong glance. Talk too much. Fu Bo tactfully shut his mouth and didn't say anything. He knew that Old Master was shy. Gu Jinglian stood up and said expressionlessly, She's injured, so it's inconvenient for her. His expression was a little unnatural. It was obvious that he felt a little uncomfortable. It's only right for me to take care of her. Uncle Fu cursed silently in his heart. What a prideful guy. Chu Ho woke up and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling in a daze. When he had just returned to the Gu family, he had a high fever due to his wound being infected. It was only until last night that he recovered some of his vitality. Gu Jinglian suddenly pushed the door open and walked in. Chu Ho heard the footsteps and looked up. When he saw that it was Gu Jinglian, he lay back on the bed like a corpse. Hungry? Gu Jinglian asked. Chu Ho shook his head. I don't have any appetite. He had been on anti-inflammatory drugs for the past few days and was about to vomit. He had no appetite at all. I want to eat something sour. Sour? Gu Jinglian's first reaction was, You're pregnant. Chu Ho, seeing that she did not speak, Gu Jinglian's expression suddenly became unnatural. Really? He remembered that he had met her once before. What does eating sour food have to do with pregnancy? It's not like only pregnant women want to eat sour food. Chu Ho paused and said, Don't worry, I took birth control pills last time. Gu Jinglian did not react at first, until he suddenly realized what birth control pills were. He came back to his senses, but his eyes instantly darkened. Birth control pills? From his tone, he sounded a little unhappy. He did not notice it and hummed in acknowledgement. Why did you take this pill? Of course I have to take it. It's a critical period. Chu Ho said again, It's so troublesome to be pregnant. Gu Jinglian's expression gradually darkened when he heard this. She said that being pregnant was troublesome. She actually felt that being pregnant with his child was a troublesome matter. Gu Jinglian's eyes suddenly turned cold. Chapter 35:60. What's wrong with you? Why do you look like that? Gu Jinglian's expression became even gloomier when she asked that question. This stupid woman actually dared to ask him why he looked like that. This kind of medicine can't be taken casually. His words made Chu Ho even angrier. How dare you say that? If it weren't for you. Chu Ho paused at this point. His face was strangely red and he couldn't continue. If he hadn't acted like a beast that night, she wouldn't have needed to take this kind of medicine. Everyone knew that taking morning after pills was bad for a woman's health. For a period of time, her menstrual cycle was messed up. However, fortunately, her physical fitness was good. She didn't need to take care of herself and slowly recovered. Gu Jinglian said coldly, You don't have to take it. What if I'm pregnant? Gu Jinglian said, "If I'm pregnant, I'll give birth to it." He replied almost at lightning speed. Chu Ho didn't react for a moment and was stunned. When he came back to his senses and repeated his words, Chu Ho was furious. A man is a man. It's easy to say that if I'm pregnant, I'll give birth to it. Gu Jinglian, don't you know how painful it is for a woman to give birth? Moreover, if the child is born, who will be responsible for raising it? The Gu family is so big. Can't we raise a child? In other words, even if she gave birth to a bunch of babies like a sow, Gu Jinglian could raise them with his eyes closed. Chu Ho's mind flashed with the image of her protecting a bunch of piglets like a sow. He shuddered. It was so scary. Chu Ho said coldly, "If I give birth, are you going to be responsible for breastfeeding, keeping watch at night, and changing diapers?" Gu Jinglian stopped talking. Chu Ho snorted coldly. "So, you don't have to be responsible for what you say. When the child is born, you won't be the one to suffer." "I'll take responsibility," Gu Jinglian said out of the blue. Chu Ho was stunned. "What did you say?" Gu Jinglian repeated patiently, "I'll be responsible." Chu Ho felt so awkward that he couldn't say anything. However, from his tone, it was clear that he was serious. This man would never make promises easily, nor would he be like other men, who would use flowery words. However, he would definitely do what he said and never go back on his words. Gu Jinglian walked to the door and stopped Uncle Fu. He instructed him before returning to her bedside to sit down. 10 minutes later, Uncle Fu sent someone to buy a few jars of dark plums. Gu Jinglian took the jars, opened the lids, picked up a plum with a fork, and brought it to her lips. "Eat." It was a harsh sentence, as if he was forcing her to eat it. Chu Ho unhappily took a bite and put it into his mouth. Actually, she didn't particularly like sour food. However, she had been lying in bed with an 4 drip for the past few days. As a result, her mouth felt bitter and astringent. In addition, the nutritious meals that Uncle Fu had prepared for her were rather bland, so there was no taste in her mouth. Hence, she wanted to eat sour food just to stimulate her taste buds. The sweet and sour dark plum kept secreting saliva in her mouth. It was so sour that Chu Ho kept blinking her eyes. Gu Jinglian also picked up a dark plum and put it into his mouth. It was so sour that he frowned. However, after the intense sourness, it was sweet. It was very sweet. Chu Ho spat out the seed and opened her mouth again, indicating for him to feed her another dark plum. Chapter 3561. Xiao Bao was taking an afternoon nap in his room when he suddenly received a call from Lin Shi. He picked up the phone, only to hear Lin Shi mumbling pitifully, "Little treasure, where you now?" "I'm in my room." "Well," Lin Shi said bitterly, "I think I'm lost." Xiao Bao blinked and said speechlessly, "Okay, where are you?" Lin Shi had been lost in the Gu residence for 5 days. The huge Gu residence was no different from a maze to him. How big was the Gu residence? Let's put it this way. His parents worked in a factory in North Africa, and the Gu residence was as big as the factory. However, he would never get lost in the factory, not only because he grew up there, but also because the roads in the factory were wide and there weren't many twists and turns. The Gu residence had dozens of courtyards in the front yard and backyard. These courtyards were connected by all sorts of winding corridors. It was no different from a maze. This wasn't the first time he got lost. Fortunately, Gu Jinglian had given him a cell phone. When he got lost, he could call Xiao Bao and Uncle Fu for help. "Lin," she said over the phone, I don't know where I am, but I see a rockery and a big pond." "There are so many rockery and ponds. I don't know which place you're talking about. There's an ancestral hall here. There seems to be a lot of memorial tablets inside." Ancestral hall. Xiao Bao thought about it carefully and remembered that he had been there twice when the Gu family worshipped their ancestors, so he knew the way. "Wait for me at the entrance of the ancestral hall. I'll go find you right away." After hanging up, Xiao Bao jumped out of bed, rubbed his eyes, and ran downstairs. After passing through several courtyards, Xiao Bao finally found the ancestral hall. He saw Lin Shi standing at the entrance, looking a little embarrassed. Xiao Bao walked over and complained, "Lin Shi, why are you here? You've been here for a few days, but you still don't know the way?" Lin, she said awkwardly, your house is so big. I get lost every time. The main thing is, I don't remember the way, so I can't tell the direction. Xiao Bao glared at him reproachfully. Lin, she thought that he had said something wrong and looked at him uneasily. Xiao Bao said, what do you mean by, my home? Lin Shi, this is your home too. When Lin Shi heard this, she realized that he was unhappy about this. Her heart warmed and she held his hand. All right, this is our home. I was wrong. Don't be angry. Xiao Bao smiled. Let's go. The two children walked hand in hand to the courtyard, but they heard a commotion not far away. It's the Gong family. Quickly go and inform the master. Then, Xiao Bao and Lin Shi saw Uncle Fu rushing to the main building. He was in such a hurry that he didn't even look at Xiao Bao. Xiao Bao looked at the entrance strangely. He saw that among the group of people, only a silver-haired man stood out. He had an imposing aura and was about the same height as Gu Jinglin. He wore a snow-white military-style trench coat and a pair of white combat boots. Every inch of his handsome face was exquisite and impeccable. Xiao Bao's eyes widened. This man was cool and handsome. Chapter 3562. Hearing this, the man turned around and nodded slightly. He instructed a few of his men to stand guard outside the door and said coldly, wait for me at the door. With that said, he followed Uncle Fu to the guest room. When he passed by Xiao Bao and Lin Shi, the man looked straight ahead without looking back. His footsteps were like the wind, messing up Xiao Bao's bangs. Lin Shi was a little intimidated by his aura and asked fearfully, who is this man? Xiao Bao shook his head in confusion. I don't know either. In the guest room, Uncle Fu brewed a pot of Dahong Pao tea and poured 2 cups of tea for Gu Jinglian and Gong Jie. Young Master Jie, what brings you here? Gong Jie took a sip and put the tea aside. He didn't exchange too many pleasantries and went straight to the point. I heard that you just returned from North Africa a while ago. Although his voice was low, he couldn't hide his aura. Hearing this, Gu Jinglian said mildly, yes. I heard about it too. Gong Jie looked at him. The Gu Industries factory in North Africa, Werther, has been bought over by Hurricane along with the land. Since Hurricane bought it over, young Master Jie should know about it. Hearing this, Gong Jie's eyes darkened. Is this true? Gu Jinglian snorted coldly. Even in front of Gong Jie, it was hard to quell the anger in his heart. After all, he had been reluctant to give up that piece of land in Werther. At that time, he was on par with Hurricane. If Gong Fan hadn't been so despicable and ruthless, he wouldn't have taken the initiative to withdraw from the North African market. Gu Jinglian thought that Gong Jie knew about it and still came to the Gu household so brazenly to show off. Thus, his tone was very impolite. Young Master Jie, you don't have to pretend. After buying that piece of land, Hurricane Group is already the overlord of North Africa. Since that's the case, why did young Master Jie come to me and pretend to be polite? Don't tell me that you don't know about this. Gong Jie was wrongly accused. Gong Jie said honestly, I didn't know about this. To be precise, I didn't participate in the discussion. I even objected to the acquisition. He knew very well that monopolizing a market meant that he would obtain unprecedented benefits. However, this also meant that there would be no healthy competition. If it was not run properly, the market would be irredeemably rotten. There were wars in this world because of competition. Humans were also humans, and their survival was built on competition. Without competition, it would be regressing instead. It was no different from the closed-door countries of the Qing dynasty. When he was in charge of Hurricane, he had always considered a positive balance and did not oppress the other forces too much. Although his methods were also ruthless, compared to Gong Fan, they were not as terrifying and aggressive. However, if the pressure was too much, it would mean that there would be resistance. This was not something that he was happy to see. Therefore, he was not the one who initiated the acquisition. What made him even more dissatisfied was that no one in Hurricane knew about this. This matter was decided by Gong Fan directly. He did not discuss it with anyone, not even Gong Xiaoying. However, this was not the main point. The main point was, that child. Gong Jie asked in a low voice, you went to North Africa and saw Gong Fan. Gong Fan? Gu Jinglian did not evade the topic. I saw him. You saw him? Gong Jie stood up excitedly. You really saw that child? Gu Jinglian raised his eyebrows. What's with that child that made young Master Jie so excited? Chapter 3563. Have you seen his true appearance? Gong Jie asked again. When Gu Jinglian heard this, he picked up his teacup and casually picked up the lid. After taking a sip, he said calmly, Yes, I did. What does he look like? I've only seen him once. I can't remember what he looks like. Gu Jinglian said truthfully, because that child has always been wearing a cloak and a big hat. He has never shown his true appearance to anyone. Gong Jie heard this. Indeed. He had seen Gong Fan once, but from a distance he saw his back view as he boarded the ship. It was so familiar, but he could not see his face. He only saw that he was wearing a wide fur coat, like a big cloak, and a hat, so he could not see his true appearance. In fact, not to mention outsiders, even the people in the group had not seen his true appearance. It was said that those who had seen his true appearance had been shot to death on the spot. This was Gong Xiaoying's order. Therefore, Gong Jie had always been very suspicious. What was the reason for protecting a child to the point that even if someone saw his face, they would immediately make this person disappear from this world? How unpresentable was he? He could not help but be a little suspicious. You really don't remember? Gu Jinglian said coldly, I don't know how to draw portraits, and I can't describe him roughly. But if you take out a photo to compare, I might be able to recognize him. The reason why he was so calm and composed was because of the man's not-too-tough stance. The Hurricane Group and the Gu family were not at odds with each other. It was just that such a thing had happened. The Hurricane Group had violated Gu Jinglian's interests. It would be hypocritical to say that he did not bear a grudge. Gu Jinglian was very vengeful, and Gong Jie was an arrogant master. He had never taken the Gu family seriously. However, such an arrogant man did not have as high a stance in front of Gu Jinglian as before in order to inquire about the child's whereabouts. This meant that the child was very important. And Gu Jinglian was the only person who had seen the child and was still alive. To put it bluntly, he was the only lead. When Gong Jie heard this, he immediately took out a pocket watch from his chest and opened it. There was a picture embedded in the pocket watch. He walked over and handed the pocket watch to Gu Jinglian. He asked, Take a look. Is this the child? Gu Jinglian took the pocket watch. In the photo, there was an innocent child smiling at the camera. He squinted his eyes and smiled at the camera, looking pure and cute. Yun Tianyu. Indeed, he looked exactly like that child. Gong Fan was Yun Tianyu? The more he thought about it, the more terrifying it was. Gu Jinglian's lips curled into a smile. Didn't I hear that the child disappeared in an accident? It's rumored that he's already dead. Gong Jie clenched his fists. We can't come to this conclusion without seeing the corpse. Yes. If he's alive, we can't find him. If he's dead, we can't find his corpse. It's hard to say whether he's dead or not. Gu Jinglian closed the pocket watch and threw it back to Gong Jie. He asked coldly, What if I say that the child might not be dead? Gong Jie was stunned when he heard this. You mean, young Master Jie is looking for me because everyone who has seen the child is dead, including my subordinates. They all died in the child's hands. Even if it was not Gong Fan's order, these people's lives were still his. He continued, however, the Hurricane Group didn't have any disputes with the Gu family in the past, but it does now. The Hurricane Group has caused such a huge loss to the Gu family. How should we settle this debt? Chapter 3564. I don't care about the value of that piece of land. The problem is, why did that child buy that piece of land? Young Master Jie should know what he's doing. Gong Jie was silent for a long time before he returned to his seat and smiled. Young Master Gu is just worried that Hurricane will use that piece of land for experiments. When the time comes, they'll become the overlord in the future and threaten the Gu family's land. The world is bustling and I come for benefits. The world is bustling and I come for benefits. Young Master Jie should understand such a simple logic. Gu Jinglian had made it so clear. If Gong Jie still did not understand, then his title as Hurricane's chief commander was just an empty title. In other words, Gu Jinglian was implying that the Gu family's losses were small, but if Hurricane grew too big in the future, it would be lonely at the top. It would not be beneficial for Hurricane and the Gu family. Similarly, he also deliberately revealed that the child he saw in North Africa might be Yun Tianyu. However, Gong Jie still wanted a definite answer. He said, Hurricane will definitely compensate the Gu family for their losses. However, before that, you have to give me a definite answer. Is that child called Gong Fan really Yun Tianyu? I don't know. Gu Jinglian continued, no one dares to say such a thing, but the child I saw in North Africa has the same face as the child in the photo you showed me in your pocket watch. Upon hearing this, Gong Jie was so agitated that his whole body trembled. It's Yu? The legendary son of Ghosts of Hurricane Group, that mysterious young man, is really Yu, who went missing in that accident. Gong Jie clenched his fists, not knowing if this was a good or bad news. If it's Yu, why doesn't he know how to go home? Does he not want home, daddy, mommy, and brothers and sisters? If it's not Yu, why do the two children have the same face? Gu Jinglian continued, based on his appearance, the child is about 9 years old. 9 years old? Gong Jie grasped another piece of information. 9 years old. When Yu went missing, she was 8 years old. It had been more than a year since she went missing. Everything seemed to match. He didn't believe in such a great coincidence. Hence, he firmly believed that the mysterious youth called Gong Fan must be Yu. Gong Jie came to another conclusion. For the past year, Gong Xiaoying had been hiding Yu in Hurricane, and no one knew about it. Why is Yu in his hands? What did he do to Yu this time? Yu, who had been missing for a year, had turned into Gong Fan. Why had he become so ruthless? Gong Jie could not figure this out no matter how hard he tried. But one day, he was almost 100% sure. Yu was Gong Fan. Gong Fan was Yu. When he found out, Gong Jie was extremely excited. For the past year, he had not stopped looking for Yu. However, he had not found him or his corpse. Yun Shishir missed her son too much and was depressed. If it weren't for Xiao Yichen and Yue Yao, she might not have been able to walk out of this trauma. Gong Jie stood up and said to Gu Jinglian, Young Master Gu, sorry to disturb you. He turned around and left in a hurry. Gu Jinglian watched Gong Jie's back coldly. He gently blew on the surface of his tea and took a sip. In the past, if the Gong family came looking for him and asked about this matter, Gu Jinglian would have treated it as if it had nothing to do with him and would have kept quiet. However, things were different now. Chapter 3565. Perhaps it was because she was worried and put herself in his shoes that her heart softened a little. Gu Jinglian put down his teacup, slowly stood up and walked upstairs. When Gong Jie heard the news, he did not immediately look for Gong Xiaoying. Since his father had deliberately hidden Yu, named him Gong Fan, and isolated him from the world, it meant that his father had other intentions. If he found his father, Gong Xiaoying might not admit it. Instead, he would be even more guarded. As such, it might be even more difficult to find Yu. The most strange thing was that if Gong Fan was really Yu, why would he be loyal to Gong Xiaoying and not want to come home? Even if Yu did not have the ability to leave Gong Xiaoying, given Yu's personality, he would not be so loyal to Gong Xiaoying. Moreover, all along, Yu had done things that went against the original intention of the Heavenly Eye plan. Back then, Yu proposed the Heavenly Eye plan to control the war by controlling the information technology in the sky to suppress the war. Gong Xiaoying did not agree with this idea. But now, Gong Fan was going to start, sow discord, and create a war. His Heavenly Eye plan was made purely for killing. This was not Yu. This was a demon. If he was really Yu, how did he become like this? Gong Jie was heartbroken, but he could not think of a reason. He did not tell Yun Shishir about this immediately. After all, before this matter was confirmed, he did not want her to be shocked and have too much hope. If something happened then, he was worried that she would not be able to accept it. Back then, when she walked out of the shadow of this matter, he saw how much pain his sister was in. Therefore, Gong Jie left the Gu family and went to the Xingyu Financial Group first. Mu Yazhou was in the company. Gong Jie found his office, went in and got straight to the point. Mu Yaja had just finished a meeting. Jiang Shen and Lu Jinyu were also in the office. Jiang Shen was a little surprised to see Gong Jie in such a hurry. What's wrong? I have something to discuss with you. What is it? You might still be alive. The man furrowed his brows when he heard that. I know. However, we still haven't found his whereabouts. He had never given up on searching for Yu Yu's whereabouts. Even though searching for a child was undoubtedly like searching for a needle in a haystack, and the cost of searching for a person every day was very high, no one was willing to give up. That's exactly what I'm here to discuss with you, said the man. He sat down on the sofa, casually picked up the cup, and drank the tea in one gulp. At the side, Jiang Shen saw that Gong Jie was holding his teacup. He frowned and raised his hand, wanting to say something but hesitated. However, due to Gong Jie's abuse of power, he did not dare to say it out loud. He heard that this brother-in-law of his had a serious case of mysophobia. He was afraid that he would be beaten to death by Gong Jie if he said anything. I might have found out Yu Yu's whereabouts. Mu Yaja heard this and reacted for a few seconds. He stood up abruptly. What did you say? Gong Fan. Gong Jie said a name. A few days ago, there was a war in North Africa. The Gu family's worther was acquired by hurricane. I remember mentioning this to you. Okay. Mu Yaja asked again, what's the connection between these two matters? Chapter 3566. My father said that this child was left behind by him. But from what I know, it's not possible that this child is my father's direct descendant. So, you suspect that it's Yu Yu? Yes, that's my initial suspicion. Gong Jie analyzed further. Coincidentally, I heard that after Yu Yu went missing, this child was with the Gong family. It said that my father arranged for him to recuperate on a private island. This means that this child's health isn't good either. These characteristics are consistent with Yu Yu's. I heard all of this from others. Mu Yaja asked again, do you have any concrete evidence? Jiang Shen and Lu Jinyu listened quietly from the side, unable to express any opinions. Gong Jie continued, Gu Jinglian just returned from North Africa. He's the only person who has seen that child and is still alive. What do you mean? The Gong family has ordered that anyone who has seen the child's face is dead. This means that my father has protected him very well. Hence, no one knows what he looks like or who he is. As Gong Jie spoke, he frowned and said, some time ago, Hurricane acquired Wedded. I heard that it was a forced acquisition. Logically speaking, given Gu Jinglian's character, he would never give up that piece of land. I'm guessing that Gong Fan must have used something to threaten him and forced him to sign the agreement. As for why he didn't kill him, I don't know either. Are you sure? It's precisely because I'm not sure that I didn't tell Xianxia about this immediately. I'm worried that if that child isn't Yu Yu, it'll be another disappointment. Mu Yaja nodded as well. We have some leads on this matter. Let's keep it from him for the time being. Wait, Gong Jie suddenly stood up. Suddenly, he thought of something and his expression became serious. Mu Yaja saw that he looked nervous and didn't say anything. He was worried that he would disturb his thoughts. He must have found some useful clues again. Gong Jie turned around abruptly and glared at him. He suddenly said, Lisa, Alice. I remember that there was a long period of time when Alice wasn't at the headquarters. After Yu Yu went missing, there was no news of her at the headquarters. I don't know where she went. If Yu Yu was really brought back to the Gong family by father, then he must have been injured. Plus, his body needs to be nursed back to health, so he must need someone with great medical skills to look after him at all times. Alice is a doctor? Yes, she's a medical prodigy from Hurricane. Who is Lisa? She used to work for me, but I sent her to Yu Yu to be Yu Yu's personal bodyguard. I haven't seen her in a long time. Mu Yaja said, if we find Alice and Lisa, we might be able to get some clues. I can't find any traces of Lisa, but Alice is in Hurricane now. If I go back and ask her, I might be able to get some information. Mu Yaja nodded. Gong Jie left the capital. He took a private jet and rushed back to Hurricane's headquarters overnight. Gong Xiaoying wasn't on the island. He found Alice. When he saw her, she was researching medicine in the laboratory. Alice was surprised to see him back. Why are you back? Gong Jie smiled and said, I wanted to have a drink with you. Why are you busy? Chapter 3567. In the pub. When Gong Jie took out the red wine that he had kept for many years, Alice could not help but feel flattered. I see that you've been hiding these wines well. Why are you willing to take them out to drink now? Gong Jie smiled and filled her glass. Alice smiled and took a sip from the wine glass. Her mouth was filled with its mellow fragrance. You didn't come back in such a hurry just to have a drink with me, did you? Alice teased. Don't tell me you came back because you missed me? Gong Jie was used to her teasing, but now, he was not in the mood to chat with her. He said bluntly, I came back to ask you something. Okay, go ahead. I'll answer whatever you ask. As Alice spoke, she sipped the rim of her glass and sized him up. Gong Jie went straight to the point. Some time ago, you disappeared for a long time. No one knows where you went. Alice's hand that was holding the wine glass suddenly paused as her gaze froze. Gong Jie looked into her eyes seriously and said word by word, You would never leave the headquarters for no reason. There must be something special, and you had to hide this from everyone. Where did you go? Alice did not speak. You can't say? Gong Jie narrowed his eyes and asked again, Then let me ask you another question. Gong Fan, who is this child? Alice's fingers that were holding the wine glass stiffened. Gong Jie observed the change in her expression and her stiff knuckles and understood what was going on. Alice asked, Gong Fan? Why are you suddenly asking about him? No one in Hurricane knows about this child's background. You know, Alice, you know that the mouth can lie, but the eyes can't. Gong Jie said expressionlessly, At this point, are you still trying to hide it from me? If I wasn't confident, I wouldn't have come looking for you. Since I found you, I'm 90% sure that Gong Fan is Yun Tianyu, am I right? Alice suddenly stopped talking. She said with a pale face, I don't know anything. Do you really not know anything, or is it because Father told you to keep it a secret? Alice was speechless. Her feelings told her that she could not lie to Gong Jie. However, her rationality reminded her that she had to keep this a secret. However, he also felt heartache. For Yu and at the same time, for Gong Jie. Alice put down her wine cup and suddenly said, Gong Jie, as a friend, can I remind you to persuade your sister to return to the Gong family and acknowledge her father? Blood is thicker than water and is connected by blood. How can a biological daughter not acknowledge her father? Gong Jie narrowed his eyes, his expression a little gloomy. Alice, are you implying that father hid you as a punishment for sister? Alice looked away in a panic. I didn't say that. Gong Jie suddenly grabbed her chin and forced her to look at him. Alice, look into my eyes. Alice looked up at him. Gong Jie said word by word, Alice, if you lie to me in the slightest, you'll regret it. Gong Jie, do you know that we've been looking for you like crazy? Chapter 3568. Alice hurriedly said, Gong Jie, calm down. How can I calm down? Gong Jie retorted angrily. If you tell me that because my sister didn't acknowledge him because of this matter, you hid you by your side as a punishment, that's simply unreasonable. Things aren't what you think. Alice also stood up and said agitatedly, There's no punishment or targeting. It's just that, Gong Jie stared at her. Alice, you've never been a mother before. You don't know what the pain of losing a child means. Alice stared at Gong Jie with her mouth agape. Suddenly she felt a sharp pain in her heart. She clenched her fists and suddenly said self-deprecatingly, I'm afraid I won't have the chance to be a mother in this lifetime. However, that doesn't mean that I can't understand how it feels to be a mother. Gong Jie was also stunned. He knew that his unintentional words had hurt her. Alice was infertile. Before she came to Hurricane, she was an ordinary doctor. In order to research a vaccine, she did not hesitate to use herself as an experimental subject. She did not expect that the experiment would fail and the virus would backfire. She was infected with the virus and was finally out of danger after a few days and nights of emergency treatment. Because of this, she was expelled from the hospital. Because of the virus, she was infertile for the rest of her life. This almost became a thorn in her heart. I'm sorry. It's okay. It has nothing to do with you. She must have thought of the fact that she was infertile. Gong Jie did not mean that in his words. Gong Jie sighed. Forget it. Since you don't want to say it, then forget it. He was about to leave when Alice suddenly spoke. I'm curious. How did you suspect that Gong Fan is Yun Tianyu? Gong Jie paused in his steps and turned around with a smile. Direct and accurate. Combining the clues, Gong Fan's identity was indeed very suspicious. Alice said, sit. Hearing this, Gong Jie did not say much and just sat down on a chair. Just as he sat down, Alice suddenly asked curiously, don't you suspect that Gong Fan is Yun Tianyu? Why didn't he go back and look for you guys? I still can't explain this matter to this day. Could it be amnesia? Alice smiled and picked up the goblet. She drank the wine in the goblet in one gulp and finally decided to be frank. Perhaps it was the man's words that had finally touched her. The pain of losing a child, as a woman herself, she could not bear to see her flesh and blood being separated from her. Alice said, You didn't lose her memory. Hearing this, Gong Jie raised his head abruptly and glared at her. So, you admit that Gong Fan is Yun Tianyu? Yes. Alice nodded frankly. Gong Jie, you're so smart. You already have the answer in your heart. You asked me because you trust me. After so many years of friendship, I can't let you down. Gong Jie did not know whether to be happy or worried when he heard this. He was happy that Yu was still alive. What Alice said must be true. No matter what, it was a blessing in disguise that he was still alive. However, he was worried that Yu had become like this, which made him extremely heartbroken. Just the fact that he had accepted the name Gong Fan was puzzling. He has already forgotten about you. Chapter 3569. What? Gong Jie widened his eyes in disbelief. That's impossible. It's fine if he forgot about me, but how could he forget about his beloved mommy? Could it be that his brain? There's nothing wrong with his brain. The so-called memory loss is not what you think it is. Alice's expression was calm, but there was a hint of guilt in her eyes. Gong Jie did not say anything. He looked at her, waiting for her to tell him everything. Alice took a deep breath and said honestly, I hypnotized him. Hypnotized? Do you know about deep hypnosis? Gong Jie was so shocked that he was speechless. He suddenly remembered that when a person wanted to leave the hurricane group, they would use deep hypnosis to erase all memories related to the hurricane group. On one hand, this was to protect the interests of the hurricane group. On the other hand, the memories related to the hurricane group were too dark. If the person wanted to leave the group and return to a normal life, these memories would be a burden. Hence, deep hypnosis could erase a lot of memories. Such hypnosis had always been carried out secretly by Alice. Gong Jie had always known about hypnosis, but he did not know that the person who carried it out was Alice. So, you hypnotized him? How did you hypnotize him? Gong Jie asked agitatedly, Can the erased memories come back? Yes, but it's very difficult. Not only were Yu's memories erased, but his first personality also disappeared. Personality? You didn't know that Yu has two personalities? I didn't know. Alice explained, he has two personalities. One is the most innocent side, like a piece of white paper, spotless. The other is the dark side, evil, like a demon. Gong Jie was stunned. So, you erased his first personality and he became like this? You can say that. Alice analyzed Yu's personality for Gong Jie. Yu's childhood was spent in happiness and darkness. The happiness was that even though he grew up in a single-parent family, Yun Shishir gave him a lot of love and companionship. However, the darkness was that Yun Na and Li Qin's insults and scoldings gave birth to the hatred in his heart. The two personalities existed independently and did not interfere with each other. Back then, when Yu dealt with Yun Na and Li Qin, the first personality did not know about it. He only vaguely knew that he seemed to have done something earth-shattering. One was innocent, the other. One was an angel, the other was a demon. Back then, when she sealed Yu's memories, her first personality was also destroyed by her second personality along with the memories. The memories, but the personality. Even if the memories were recovered, the first personality would not come back. After Yu became Gong Fan, he was completely dark. He was ruthless, black-bellied, and would do anything to achieve his goals. However, Xianxia was still the white moonlight in his heart. However, even Xianxia would not be able to awaken his first personality. There was no such thing as reviving a destroyed personality. Chapter 3570. You should be apologetic. If I didn't mention this matter, how long were you planning to hide it from me? Alice said weakly, this was your father's request. As his subordinate, I had no choice but to carry it out and keep it a secret. Now that I've told you this secret, I've already broken the rules. Gong Jie clenched his fists and trembled in anger. Why did he do that? He really could not understand. What was the meaning of Gong Xiaoying doing this? He intends to use Yu to deal with Xingyu. Deal with Xingyu? Gong Jie's eyes were filled with shock. He knew that his father hated Wuxia to the core, but he did not expect him to be so cruel as to use an innocent child to deal with Xingyu. When the time comes, when Yu deals with Xingyu, he'll use this as a threat to make Xianxia return to the Gong family. Doesn't he think that he's being cruel? Jie, Alice said calmly, do you think that with your father's status, he's in a high position and no one has ever dared to go against his words? In his mind, there are no rules about right or wrong. In his mind, he doesn't care who's right or wrong. No one can stop him from getting what he wants. He loves Yu, but in his mind, he doesn't think that it's a mistake for his grandson to return to the Gong family. However, if he doesn't use this method, he won't be able to keep anyone. Whether it's Xianxia or Tianyu, he feels lonely, but other than power, he has no other means to get his daughter back. When love reached the depths, in a certain aspect, this love would change its form and flavor. Gong Xiaoying was wrong, but Alice understood. Gong Xiaoying was hateful, but he was also pitiful. Yu is the most pitiful one, Gong Jie said. He didn't have any choice and had his memory cruelly erased by you. Do you know who is the most important person in his life? Alice didn't make a sound. His mother, Gong Jie continued. He regarded Xianxia as more important than his own life. Erasing his memory is even more cruel than killing him. Alice was so shocked that she almost suffocated. Indeed, ever since Yu's memory was erased, he had become a completely different person. He was a true devil. If Xianxia saw this, she would be very sad. Gong Jie didn't even know how to mention it to him. I want to see him. Gong Jie suddenly said, let me see him. You can't see him. Your father protected him very well because he was worried that you would bring him back. Still, even without Gong Xiaoying's interference, the current Yu may not be willing to leave with you if you want to take him away. Gong Jie smiled. I know. Then, so, if I borrow you, maybe you can see him. Alice was stunned. She immediately understood what Gong Jie was referring to. I've been investigating your recent whereabouts. You disappear for a period of time in the middle of every month. I'm guessing that you must have gone to the island during this period. Alice did not say a word. Gong Jie held her hand tightly. Bring me to him, Alice. Chapter 3571. She looked up and said calmly, okay, I'll take you there. However, you need to be prepared. At least, when you board the ship, you can't reveal that you're the crown prince of the Gong family. There were still more than 10 days until the middle of the month. Gong Jie and Wuxia had a video call over the ocean. When Gong Jie found out about this, he said that he had confirmed that Wuxia was Yu and that Alice would bring him to see him in the middle of the month. Wuxia expressed that he wanted to go too. Gong Jie laughed. Brother-in-law, don't joke around. You're the most dangerous person in Hurricane. You can't even get on the ship. Wuxia raised his eyebrows. Okay, it's fine if I don't go. However, if Xianxia goes, it shouldn't be a problem. Gong Jie immediately understood what Wuxia meant. He frowned and thought about it carefully. I understand your plan. Okay, then I'll send Xianxia to your place 3 days in advance. Okay. After ending the video call, Wuxia stood up from the desk. After hesitating for a long time, he finally decided to mention this matter to Xianxia. Xianxia was reading a script in the bedroom. Wuxia pushed the door open, gently knocked on the door, and walked into the room. When she heard the sound, she looked up. When she saw him walking in with a serious expression, she became very nervous. What happened? Wuxia sat on the side of the bed silently. He crossed his legs elegantly and said in a deep voice, "There's something I want to tell you. However, you have to stay calm. Don't be nervous and don't get agitated, okay?" Xianxia laughed. "Why are you so serious? What's the matter?" "Don't worry, I won't get agitated." Wuxia smiled and stroked her hair gently. "You," just the name that escaped from his thin lips made her face turn ghastly pale. Ever since Yu went missing, this name had become an unspeakable pain in her heart. At the mention of this name, Xianxia's heart ached. "Why did you mention him? Yu is not dead yet?" Xianxia couldn't react for a moment. It was only after she had a hard time separating the 5 words from each other and repeatedly comprehending them that she was stunned and suffocated. He's not dead?" Xianxia immediately sat up and stared at Wuxia in disbelief. "Is this true? Don't lie to me." It wasn't easy for her to pull herself out of despair. Now, she couldn't take a second blow. Wuxia's lips curled into a smile. "Do you think I'll joke about this? Xiaojie was the one who told me that Yu is not dead." "He's not dead. Then where is he?" "At the Gong residence." Xianxia's expression froze at once. "He was hidden by your father. He changed his name and disappeared without a trace." It's impossible." Xianxia smiled weakly. "Could you be mistaken? Yu is at the Gong residence, but it's been so long. Why hasn't he returned home? He was hypnotized and lost all his memories. He even forgot his own name." Wuxia continued, "He also forgot about you, forgot about me, forgot about Xianxia, forgot about Yueyao." Xianxia gasped and shook her head in disbelief. "I don't believe it. How could he have lost his memories?" This was something that only appeared in movies, but it actually happened to her. It was unbelievable. Chapter 3572. "Listen, Xianxia. I'm just letting you know about this, but you have to stay calm. Don't think too much. Leave this to me. I can handle it." "But," Wuxia held her shoulders and asked seriously, "Do you trust me?" Xianxia looked into his eyes and was silent for a long time. Then she suddenly said, "Of course. You're my husband. How can I not trust you?" She hugged him tightly. She didn't know whether to be happy or worried about this news. Her eyes were a little red. She was happy that Yu was still alive. As long as he was still alive, it was a blessing in disguise. However, she was worried that she didn't know when Yu would be able to come home. Xianxia walked into the baby's room. Yueyao was lying in the crib, fast asleep. There was a small night light above the crib. It was soft but not glaring. It shone on Yueyao's tender little face, which was as tender as white jade. Yueyao would be 2 years old in a few months' time. She wondered if Yu would be able to come home on that day. Xianxia looked at Yueyao's neck. There was a necklace around her neck. It was made by Xianxia. During the accident, Xianxia had been holding tightly onto the 2 purple crystals that Yu had given him. He made 2 necklaces. One was for himself, and the other was for Yueyao's neck as a memento. After Yu's accident, Xianxia had matured overnight. He had transformed from his childish self into a mature big brother. Xianxia dreamed of Yu. Yu said to him, "When I'm not around, you have to take good care of Mommy and Yueyao." He had always engraved these words in his heart. Xianxia believed that Yu was definitely still alive. The telepathy between the Gemini twins told him that Yu wasn't dead, but he didn't know where he was. However, his ability was limited. He didn't know how to search, but he never gave up. Xianxia smiled. "Yueyao, I remember that the first word you learned to say was brother. You really want Yu to come back, don't you?" Yueyao's eyes were tightly shut, but her pink lips were slightly curled up. She was clearly having a sweet dream. Xianxia stood at the door but did not enter. Instead, he quietly leaned against the door and looked at his mother, who was squatting by the crib and talking to Yueyao with a gentle expression. He smiled. Mu Yaja had already told him about this. When he found out that Yu was still alive, he was both surprised and not surprised at the same time. His daddy said that Gong Jie would bring him to see Yu in the middle of the next month. At the same time, he also gave him a very important task. Gong Jie would think of a way to bring Yu back. Xiao Yichen would stay on the island as Gong Fan and replace Gong Fan for the time being. Xiao Yichen gladly agreed. Even if he was trapped on the island, he still had a way to come back. However, he was more worried. If Yu was brought back, would he be able to regain his memory? Xiao Yichen wasn't sure about Yu's current situation. He also didn't know if his so-called memory loss could be recovered. He only hoped that his uncle would bring Yu back to the Mu family. At least, Yun Shishir could wake him up and help him regain his memory. "Mommy," Xiao Yichen called her softly. Yun Shishir turned around and saw him standing at the door. She immediately wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes. "You're not asleep yet?" "Yes, I was passing by and saw that the door was open." Chapter 3573. In the middle of every month, Gong Fan would return to Ashland Island with Lisa. The medication that Alice had concocted could only last for about 30 days. She had to renew the medication every month. His sleep condition was very bad. He had insomnia, many dreams, and nightmares. His mental strength was also very weak. If not for the special sleeping pills that Alice had concocted, it would be very difficult for him to fall asleep peacefully. Other than that, his body also needed regular checkups. He returned to Ashland Island before the middle of the month. Just as he returned to the island, Lisa received a call from Alice. Alice said that she would arrive at the island early the next morning. Lisa could not help but feel a little suspicious. Originally, Alice would arrive on the 15th of every month. Tomorrow was the 12th. What was going on? Alice explained that there was a new batch of medication that had been improved and would replace the previous batch. Lisa no longer doubted him after hearing that. Before this, Xiao Yichen had already disguised himself and sneaked onto the ship that was heading to Ashland Island. It would take an entire night to reach Ashland Island from the hurricane headquarters. Alice's makeup skills were top-notch. She applied makeup on Gong Jie and Xiao Yichen and easily fooled them. After all, with Alice's face, she would not be put in a difficult position. She lied and said that Gong Jie and Xiao Yichen were her assistants. Gong Jie was still alright. He used a wig to replace his original silver hair. This made it very difficult for people to recognize him. Xiao Yichen, on the other hand, was much more aggrieved. He was not considered short for his age. He was about 1.5 meters tall, which was already considered very tall. However, it was still difficult for him to disguise himself as an adult man. Hence, Alice put on a woman's wig for him. He wore a white lab coat and put on some rouge. He was already very good-looking and had the unique aura of a young man. After a little makeup, he really looked like a young woman. After spending a night on the ship, Alice instructed him to do some things. First, if there were no accidents, Xiao Yichen would have to stay on Ashland Island for a month. She would think of a way to cover for him to leave the island the next month. Gong Jie was a little worried. He was not worried that Xiao Yichen's identity would be exposed. It was just that there would be no one else on the island for a month. Other than the maids, there would not even be a playmate. Given Xiao Yichen's personality, would he be too lonely? Little Yichen, on the other hand, did not mind. Even though he might have to be separated from his parents and sister for a month, he was willing to do it in exchange for Yu's return, even if he had to pay a heavier price than this. The ship docked at the harbor. Lisa stood at the harbor to welcome them. However, when she saw Gong Jie and Xiao Yichen behind Alice, her eyes suddenly flashed fiercely. She frowned slightly, obviously sensing that something was amiss. After a moment of surprise, she did not show any suspicion. She only said in a cold tone, "Alice, you're here." In the hurricane headquarters, there was no distinction of seniority. Hence, Lisa had always called Alice by her name. Alice smiled at her. "Is he awake?" "Yes, he's awake. He's reading in the study," Lisa said. Her tone was calm and emotionless, like an emotionless machine. Xiao Yichen could not help but look at her again. Chapter 3574. However, Xiao Yichen could only lament and didn't reveal his emotions. He followed closely behind Alice, lowered his head, and quietly walked into the castle. Would he be able to see Yu soon? Xiao Yichen suddenly felt extremely excited. When he thought of this, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. He didn't know how Yu had changed after not seeing Yu for more than a year. Had he grown taller? Was he still as skinny as before? Would he recognize him when they met? Xiao Yichen clenched his fists tightly, only to feel his palms full of cold sweat. The castle was huge. As Lisa led them all the way, Xiao Yichen only felt that there were endless stairs and endless corridors. Finally, after walking for a very long time, Lisa stopped in front of a door and said in a deep voice, "Young master is in his room. You can go in directly." Alice pushed open the door and walked in naturally. Gong Jie followed closely behind. Just as Xiao Yichen was about to step in, he inexplicably felt Lisa's gaze on him, as if she was secretly examining him. He followed her gaze and sized her up, only to see that she was coldly sizing him up. That gaze, which seemed to be able to see through his entire body, made Xiao Yichen's heart jolt violently. He had an inexplicable suspicion that Lisa might have recognized him. Lisa quickly turned her gaze away and looked out the window, as if the gaze she gave him just now was just a casual glance. Xiao Yichen didn't take it to heart. He entered the room and locked the door from the inside. Alice walked into the bedroom and saw the back of a young man lying quietly on the big bed. He lay quietly on the bed with his eyes closed, as if he was still asleep. However, Gong Jie and Xiao Yichen, who were standing behind her, couldn't calm down. Especially when he saw the young man's extremely familiar yet pale face, Gong Jie's breathing suddenly became erratic. He walked excitedly to the bed and squatted beside it until he recognized that the child in front of him was really Yu. Yu, who had disappeared without a trace for more than a year, suddenly felt a burning sensation in his chest. It really was Yu. Xiao Yichen was so excited that his entire body trembled. This voice had only appeared in his dreams for more than a year. Now that he finally saw it in real life, he couldn't even tell if this was reality or a dream. Gong Jie couldn't help but reach out and cup Yu's little face. However, the moment he touched his face, the young man on the bed suddenly woke up. He suddenly opened his cold eyes, and his pupils contracted. When he recognized the unfamiliar man in front of him, he sat up in shock and coldly swatted his hand away. There was a loud smack. He swatted Gong Jie's hand away expressionlessly and asked coldly, "Who are you?" Gong Jie was about to step forward when Alice immediately stopped him. She said to Yu, "Young master, these two are the assistants I brought over. He was taking your temperature just now." The young man frowned but didn't say anything. He only glanced at Gong Jie and Xiao Yichen cautiously. Xiao Yichen saw Yu's cold and indifferent gaze land on him. He scrutinized him for a long time before he finally looked away coldly. It was obvious that he didn't pay much attention to him. At the same time, this also meant that Yu had really forgotten about him. Perhaps he didn't feel anything when he was asleep, but when he woke up, Xiao Yichen suddenly realized that Yu had really changed. He had become especially unfamiliar. Chapter 3575. Alice pretended to be normal as she walked over. As usual, she started a series of tests on him, including measuring his blood pressure and temperature. Yu was very obedient. He allowed her to use all sorts of instruments to measure his body. However, his expression was indifferent, as if it was just a routine. Seeing that he was so calm, Alice couldn't help but ask, "Do you still have palpitations recently?" "Occasionally." He was a man of few words. If he could describe something with one word, he would definitely be stingy. He didn't speak often. Probably, other than him, no one else could live on this isolated island for a few months without breaking down. Humans were social animals. They were used to living in groups and isolated from society. Yu only had Lisa by his side. However, both of them were quiet and didn't speak often. Occasionally, Lisa would deliberately talk to him, but Yu would only use a few words to end the conversation. In the past, Yu was naturally introverted. However, because of Xianxia, he was still considered cheerful. However, under hypnosis, the second personality destroyed the first personality. As a result, the second personality completely took over. Today, Yi was more like a walking corpse. Xiao Yichen's heart ached so much that he was about to suffocate. When he thought about how lonely Yu had been for the past year, he felt as if a knife was being twisted in his heart. For some reason, he hated Gong Xiaoying even more. Gong Jie pulled Xiao Yichen behind him and reminded him, "Are you ready? Can you hold on for a month?" Xiao Yichen nodded and said firmly, "Uncle, don't worry. It's only a month. I can still hold on." Gong Jie said coldly, "I'm just afraid that when the time comes, you won't be able to think about Mommy and Yueyao until you cry and snot." Xiao Yichen pouted. "Can't I think about them even if I can't see them?" Alice glanced at them and suddenly took out a medicine box. She took out a syringe, opened a medicine bottle, and sucked the medicine into the syringe. According to the plan, she injected Yu with tranquilizers and sleeping pills in place of the original injection. Then, she disguised him as Xiao Yichen and took him away without anyone knowing. Then he asked Xiao Yichen to stay behind to replace Yu. There were not many people on the island who were close to Yu, so normally, no one would notice. Even Lisa could not tell the difference between Xiao Yichen and Yu. Alice held Yu's arm. Just as she was about to inject him, Yu caught a glimpse of the medicine bottle and was shocked to see the table of elements on the bottle. He immediately pushed her needle away. The syringe fell to the ground with a loud thud, and a few drops of medicine spilled out. Alice stared in shock. Yu asked coldly, "What medicine is this?" "This is the medicine that I've been injecting you with before." Yu narrowed his eyes and said mockingly, "The table of elements on the medicine bottle is not what it used to be." He was very observant. In the past, whenever Alice injected him with medicine, he would observe the table of elements on the medicine bottle. Now, the medicine that Alice was about to inject was obviously not the same medicine as before. Moreover, she had brought 2 suspicious people with her this time. In an instant, he became even more vigilant. Yu suddenly opened his mouth and was about to ask Lisa to come in when Gong Jie rushed over and covered his mouth tightly. He warned, "Don't make a sound." Chapter 3576. Yu sized him up coldly. He struggled fiercely, trying to break free from Gong Yichen's grip. Gong Jie saw that he was struggling fiercely, so he used his hand like a knife and slashed the back of his neck. Yu's eyelids fluttered, and he fainted on the bed. Alice was dumbfounded. Xiao Yichen was so shocked that he couldn't close his mouth. He ran to the bed and carried Yu. He opened his eyelids and saw that he had really fainted. He was shocked. "Uncle, you're so cruel. You're so cruel to your own nephew." Gong Jie held his forehead and said with a headache, "I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't use too much strength. He won't die. He's just fainted." "If you used more strength, Yu's neck would have been broken, okay?" Xiao Yichen said angrily. Gong Jie was as strong as 3 adults, and he still had the cheek to say that he didn't use too much strength. If he used more strength, he would have killed him. Gong Jie cleared his throat awkwardly and said, "It's good that you hit him. Maybe he'll remember who he is." He looked at Alice for confirmation, but she said coldly, "No matter how much you hit him, he won't regain his memory." Gong Jie's lips twitched. Although his heart ached, there was nothing he could do. "I'm worried that he'll spread the news." "Okay, don't make a fuss." When he was young, he often got injured during training. He didn't suffer any injuries that were more serious than this. Xiao Yichen carefully touched the back of Yu's neck. Seeing that there weren't any injuries or fractures, he was relieved. Yu had fainted. This time, he could finally do whatever he wanted. Little Yichen hugged him tightly as if he had found his lost treasure. His eyes reddened uncontrollably. Yu. Xiao Yichen's heart was filled with tenderness when he finally met her after so many times in his dreams. No matter what, he had to bring Yu home. He never belonged to Hurricane. He belonged to the Mu family. He had a father, a mother, a brother, and a sister who loved him. He shouldn't be Gong Fan. He shouldn't be such a cold-blooded, demon-like war machine. Alice walked over and helped Yu lie flat on the bed. She helped him dress up, then took off Yu's clothes for Xiao Yichen to change into, while Xiao Yichen put on Yu's clothes. After more than a year, Yu had also developed a little and grown taller. However, compared to Xiao Yichen, he was still very skinny. The clothes on his body looked very empty. After putting the wig on his head, the job was finally done. Xiao Yichen, on the other hand, disguised himself as Gong Fan and lay on the bed. Based on his appearance alone, no one would be able to tell that he was a fake. Gong Jie frowned and said with disdain, "Can't you act more realistically? Make your expression cold and your gaze fierce." Xiao Yichen immediately put on a straight face. However, Gong Jie was used to seeing his warm smile. Now that he suddenly imitated Yu Yu's expression and put on a cold face, Gong Jie couldn't get used to it. Alice said, "There aren't many people on this island, so you don't have to force yourself. However, you can't give yourself away when you're facing Lisa. She's in charge of taking care of Yu Yu for Gong Xiaoing. If you give yourself away, it'll be hard for the news to leak. When that happens, it'll be very difficult." Chapter 3577. Xiao Yichen and Yu Yu had been swapped. The swapped Yu Yu was immediately taken away by Gong Jie. When they left, Gong Jie carried him on his back. Lisa stood at the door and saw Gong Jie carrying Yu Yu. The guy on his shoulder had obviously fainted. She asked symbolically, "What's wrong with him?" "Blood sickness." He had fainted. Lisa didn't probe further with such a careless explanation. She obviously didn't suspect anything either. As an assistant, how could he faint from blood sickness for no reason? That didn't make sense. She let him go easily. Gong Jie couldn't help but feel that something was amiss. He turned around and looked deeply at Alice, only to see her enter the room with a cold expression and close the door. He had a feeling that she knew about this matter. Gong Jie asked Alice, "Have you communicated with Lisa about this?" But I have a feeling that she knows." Gong Jie lowered his voice and said, "I swapped Yu Yu." Alice furrowed her brows and turned around to take a look. However, she didn't have time to think too much about it. "Now's not the time to think about this. Let's get out of here quickly." Gong Jie nodded. After Gong Jie and Alice left with Yu Yu, Lisa entered the room. Xiao Yichen was initially at a loss. When he saw her enter, he frowned and pretended to be asleep on the bed. He wanted to bluff his way out of this. Lisa walked to the bedside and saw Xiao Yichen lying on the bed quietly asleep. She smirked mockingly and kicked him. Xiao Yichen sat up in shock and said angrily, "Why did you kick me?" "They're gone. You don't have to pretend anymore." "Pretend?" Xiao Yichen's heart skipped a beat, but he refused to admit it. "What do you mean pretend? I don't know what you're talking about." "You can understand." Lisa paused and said, "Mu Yichen." When Xiao Yichen heard this, he abruptly turned his head and stared intently at her. He couldn't believe that Lisa could recognize him so easily. After all, he and Yu Yu looked exactly the same. At first, even Mu Yaja couldn't tell them apart. Only Yun Shishir could recognize them at first glance. How could Lisa tell at a glance that he wasn't Yu Yu? She could even tell that he was pretending to be asleep. What a sharp gaze. Lisa pursed her lips coldly, apparently knowing what he was thinking. She said coldly, "I recognized you the moment you got off the boat." Usually, Alice would only come alone. She was not allowed to bring anyone with her. However, today, two strangers had appeared. Even though Gong Jie and Xiao Yichen were in disguise and no one could recognize them, it didn't mean that she wasn't observant. She used to be Gong Jie's maid, so how could she not recognize him? Xiao Yichen had the same face as Yu Yu, so how could she not recognize him? No matter how he disguised himself, it was difficult to change his facial features. She knew very well that they were here to take Yu Yu away. However, she turned a blind eye and did not stop them. With her ability, she was fully capable of stopping them. However, she didn't. Xiao Yichen's heart skipped a beat. He was so nervous that he broke out in a cold sweat. He was worried that Lisa would ignore Yu Yu if she knew about this. Lisa smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'll just pretend that I don't know about this. From now on you're Gong Fan. As long as you play your role well and don't let anyone recognize you, I won't make things difficult for you." Chapter 3578. Why did she do that? Her job was to protect Yu Yu, but in reality, she was a spy that Gong Xiaoying had placed around him to keep an eye on him. This was her job, but she didn't fulfill it. She even let Yu go on purpose. Why did she do that? There's no reason. Lisa couldn't be bothered to explain further. I'm guessing that Alice will report to Gong Xiaoying that you're unwell. You don't have to go anywhere except here. You just have to stay here quietly. Remember, don't talk too much. After she finished speaking, she turned around and left the room swiftly. Xiao Yichen leaned against the headboard in a daze. For a moment, his mind was in a mess. When Yu woke up, he was in a high-class cabin. He sat up and realized that he was on a huge bed. Just as he sat up, he heard a man's elegant voice beside him. You're finally awake? Before Yu could react, Gong Jie pounced on him. He hugged his head and rubbed his face. Yu, Uncle missed you so much. Yu frowned and instinctively reached out to push him away. So disgusting, so mushy, Yu said coldly, let go of me. However, Gong Jie didn't let go of him. Instead, he cupped his face and planted a kiss on his cheek. Get lost. Yu instinctively pushed his face away and distanced himself from him. Immediately, he reached out and rubbed the spot where Gong Jie had kissed him. His eyes were filled with disgust. Who was this man? He actually kissed him. Yu looked up angrily and glared at Gong Jie. What are you doing? Kissing my biological nephew. Biological nephew? Yu narrowed his eyes dangerously and asked suspiciously, who are you? Gong Jie said pitifully, you, don't tell me you don't even recognize your biological uncle? I'm your uncle, Gong Jie. Gong Jie? Yu coldly spat out 3 words, I don't know you. He wiped the spot where Gong Jie had kissed him. Then, he rubbed his hand on the bedsheet forcefully. Gong Jie was traumatized when he saw this. You think I'm dirty? Yes. It's dirty, he admitted bluntly in a cold-blooded tone. Gong Jie was speechless. Gong Jie. He really wanted to beat him. In the past, he had never felt that this fellow deserved a beating. Gong Jie inched closer to him and asked angrily, you really don't recognize me? Should I know you? You Gong Jie pursed his lips and comforted him, it's okay if you don't recognize me. Anyway, it's good that you're still alive. Your mommy knows you're still alive. She's waiting for you at home. Mommy, this word actually caused a slight ripple to appear in his ice-cold heart. Even though he quickly regained his deathly stillness, only this word caused him to become slightly absent-minded. In an unfamiliar environment, he was surprisingly calm. He asked, where are you taking me? Although the Gong Jie sitting in front of him had an overbearing aura, Yu's aura was not suppressed at all. Chapter 3579. Looking out of the window, Yu saw the sea. He knew that he was now traveling on the sea, which was no different from a cage on the sea. It was difficult for him to escape, and he was destined to be unable to escape from this man's control. Since he was already here, he might as well take things as they came. Yu lay down on the bed quietly and said coldly, you don't have to watch over me. I can't escape anyway. Gong Jie widened his eyes in surprise. He was surprised by his calmness. However, he quickly smiled and stood up. Have a good rest today. You'll go home tomorrow. He left the room after he finished speaking. After the door was closed, Yu closed his eyes and fell asleep. At the same time, in the Mu residence, Xianxia was restless. She tossed and turned in bed when she returned to her room. She could not sleep well and felt uneasy. Gong Jie sent her a message saying that he was on his way back with Yu and asked her not to worry. However, she was nervous, agitated, and uneasy. She was worried about Yu, but she was even more worried about Xiao Yichen. Would he be lonely on the island alone? Initially, she did not agree to this plan no matter what. Yu was back, but what about Xiao Yichen? Was he going to replace Yu and stay on the island forever? She heard that there was nothing on the island except for a huge castle. It was almost isolated from the rest of the world. Wouldn't Xiao Yichen feel lonely? Xianxia's heart ached when she imagined Xiao Yichen being left alone on the island. However, she also felt that it was unfair to Xiao Yichen. She also felt that Mu Yaja was heartless. However, Xiao Yichen said that he was only going to replace Yu temporarily. It did not mean that he would never return. The most important thing now was to bring Yu Yu back and recover his memory as soon as possible. After that, everything would be easier. If Yu Yu continued to stay on the island, nothing would go smoothly in the future. Yun Shishir reluctantly agreed. Before Xiao Yichen left, Yun Shishir hugged him to sleep for the entire night. Xiao Yichen hugged her tightly because he was going to be away for a long time. He did not know when he would be back, so it was inevitable that he would miss her. Xiao Yichen did not dare to stay any longer, and he left hurriedly as he was afraid that it would make her sad. Now that Yu Yu was already on his way back, she felt inexplicably uneasy. 2 days later, the ship docked. Mu Yaja and Yun Shishir were waiting at the port in advance. When Gong Jie carried Yu Yu off the ship, Yun Shishir saw them from afar. She and Mu Yaja went up to them excitedly. Before they even got close, tears rolled down their cheeks. Yu Yu looked at the tall and handsome man in the crowd. Her gaze was fixed on him, but she looked away coldly. However, when his gaze fell on Yun Shishir and he saw her red eyes looking at him with anticipation, he did not know why his heart started to beat erratically. Yu Yu was inexplicably stunned by his strange reaction. Yun Shishir walked up to him and held his face. She looked left and right. When she saw that it was really him, she still could not believe it. She wondered if she was dreaming. It wasn't until she caressed his face that she confirmed that this wasn't a dream. Chapter 3580. Yu Yu frowned and said coldly, "You've got the wrong person." Yun Shishir's expression froze. Mu Yaja also frowned slightly and exchanged glances with Gong Jie. Gong Jie immediately said, "He doesn't remember anything. His memories have been sealed by hypnosis." Yu Yu pursed his lips mockingly and looked away impatiently. To him, the so-called memory loss that Gong Jie mentioned was ridiculous. Memory loss? How could he have lost his memory? Who were these people, and why were they saying such strange things? In fact, it could only prove that Alice's hypnosis was too successful. The fake memories that she had created had already infiltrated Yu Yu's mind. The memories that she had fabricated made Yu Yu really believe that he had grown up in the Gong family and that he was Gong Fan and not Yu Yu. Hence, to him, what Gong Jie had said was a complete lie. He would not fall for it so easily. Yun Shishir was at a loss. The child standing in front of her had the same face as Yu Yu. Whether it was his exquisite eyes or his handsome features, they were all so familiar. In the past year, he had not appeared in her dreams countless times, but he was out of her reach. However, now that the living Yu Yu had really returned, he was so unfamiliar. The Yu Yu who used to pester her and call her "dearest mommy" seemed like he would never return. Yun Shishir's heart was filled with disappointment. She was extremely upset as tears fell one after another onto his shoulders. She was heartbroken. Yu Yu saw her tears and felt annoyed. He turned his face away and did not look at her. To him, whether it was Yun Shishir, Gong Jie or Mu Yaja, they were all complete strangers. It did not matter. Yun Shishir said with difficulty, "Yu Yu, do you really not recognize me? I've said it before." Yu Yu finally could not take it anymore. He waved her hand away and said coldly, "I've said it before. I'm not Yu Yu. You've got the wrong person. Don't call me that again." These words were undoubtedly heart-wrenching. Yun Shishir's heart ached as if it was being cut by a knife. She clenched her fists and held back her tears. At the side, Mu Yaja held her shoulders tightly and comforted her. "Don't rush. Take it slow." "Okay," Yun Shishir asked carefully. Yu Yu. Yu Yu looked at her coldly and did not say anything, as if he was looking at a stranger. However, Yun Shishir did not back away. Instead, she reached out and hugged him. His body was cold. His skin was cold as if he was born like this. His palms were cold, not as warm as Xiao Yichen's. Yun Shishir hugged him tightly. Even though Yu Yu had become so cold when she saw him again, she was already very glad that he was still alive. It was good that he was alive. She had thought that he would never come back. She was already very grateful that her most precious family member had been found after losing him. In the car ride back, Yun Shishir hugged Yu. Even though he was obviously resisting, she refused to let go and hugged him tighter and tighter. His body was so cold. She wanted to use her body temperature to warm him up. However, Yu was extremely uncomfortable. Seeing that he could not break free, he stopped struggling and looked out of the window without looking at her. His cold gaze made her heart palpitate. Chapter 3581. It was the third day since Yu left. Xiao Yichen spent the past 3 days on the island in agony. The nutritious meals, oatmeal, fruits, and all sorts of green vegetables, were all boiled once and tasteless. There was broccoli in every meal, and his eyes were about to turn green from eating. Xiao Yichen felt like he was about to turn into a rabbit. Every time he sat at the dining table, he felt like he was being tortured. He ate the tasteless vegetables and felt like a rabbit who had nothing left to live for, gnawing on the broccoli resentfully. The problem was that there were so many vegetables, but where was the meat? There was no meat at all. It was no wonder that Yu had become so thin after disappearing for more than a year. God, how could he not be thin? According to Alice's explanation, it was necessary to control the intake of protein due to certain drugs. But it couldn't be that there was no protein at all, right? The worst thing was that there was no rice, no rice, no rice. The most tragic thing needed to be emphasized thrice. Xiao Yichen's stomach was as big as a cow's, and he ate at least 2 bowls of rice per meal. However, there were only side dishes and no rice. Finally, after countless nutritious meals were served, Xiao Yichen's body swayed and he was on the verge of collapsing. He was so hungry that he felt dizzy. Finally, with a plop, he fell head first into the plate of rice. Meat? Meat? Xiao Yichen had a dream. He felt like he was looking at a huge piece of steak that had arms and legs and was running in front of him. As soon as he saw the meat, his eyes turned red. Drooling, he chased after them madly. Just as he was about to grab the meat, Lisa slapped him and woke him up. When Xiao Yichen woke up, he realized that he was in Lisa's arms. He didn't know when, but his saliva had dripped onto her chest. Lisa's face turned green. She said coldly, "You can talk in your sleep?" Xiao Yichen blinked in shock. He furrowed his brows and asked in confusion, "What did I just say?" "Roga?" Lisa said strangely, "It's a name." Xiao Yichen pondered for a moment and scratched his head. "I dreamt of a piece of meat running in front of me." Lisa's eyes darkened. What? Did his flesh grow legs? Could his dream be any more absurd? Xiao Yichen asked, "Why did I faint?" Lisa said coldly, "Low blood sugar." "Low blood sugar?" Xiao Yichen sobbed. "I was healthy when I came here, but I've been starved to the point of hypoglycemia?" Lisa rolled her eyes. "Who asked you to eat so much?" "I haven't eaten meat in days." On the way here, because they were on the ship, the food was not very good. Originally, they thought that they would be able to eat to their heart's content, but in the end, what greeted them was green food. He was starving to the point of lovesickness. He really wanted to know how Yu had survived the past year. If he doesn't eat meat, won't Yu suffer from hypoglycemia? The medicine that Alice prescribed will help him replenish the effects he needs. It was rare for Lisa to speak so much. She glanced at him in disdain. "Are you awake? Can you get up and walk?" "I'm starving to death." Xiao Yichen said pitifully, "I want to eat meat." "Do you eat human meat?" Lisa asked. Xiao Yichen looked at her in disdain. She was so skinny from head to toe. What was there to eat? Chapter 3582. They looked like 2 small steamed buns. Xiao Yichen's face suddenly flushed red. Lisa glanced at him and looked at his expression. She then followed his gaze and it landed on her chest. No matter how stupid she was, she could tell that he was staring at her chest. Lisa's face darkened. Suddenly she released her grip on Xiao Yichen, causing him to lose his balance and fall to the ground with a loud thud. "Pervert!" Lisa scolded him coldly. Stepping over him, she went back to her room. Xiao Yichen sat up from the ground and rubbed his butt in pain. Feeling wronged, he said, "What? It hurts. Why wasn't she gentle at all?" He saw that she was very respectful and gentle to Yu. It wasn't fair. Xiao Yichen nimbly got up from the ground and chased after Lisa. He muttered behind her, "Why are you so gentle to Yu but so violent to me?" Lisa rolled her eyes expressionlessly and ignored him. "Hey, since I'm replacing Yu now, you should treat me as Yu too. Be gentler." Lisa suddenly stopped in her tracks and turned around calmly. She looked at him meaningfully and said in a mocking tone, "Are you as smart as Yu? Are you as obedient as Yu? Yu isn't as perverted as you." As she said this, she glared coldly at Xiao Yichen and said coldly, "Mu Yichen, I'm warning you. If you stare at me again." Lisa instinctively covered her chest with her hands and said with an ashen face, "Keep your eyes to yourself. If you keep looking, I'll dig your eyes out." After Lisa finished speaking, she walked away. Xiao Yichen watched her leave in shock. He couldn't help but lament, how violent. Even though Xiao Yichen was very resistant to green vegetables, he could only pretend to be calm and silently eat grass in order not to expose his identity. After 4 days, Xiao Yichen finally couldn't take it anymore. He started a hunger strike and insisted on eating meat. Lisa had no choice but to order the chef to prepare steak in the name of wanting to eat meat. At night, little Yichen lay in bed, clutching his growling stomach as he tossed and turned. He was so hungry that he could not fall asleep no matter how hard he tried. The lights suddenly came on. Lisa turned on the lights and walked in with a tray of food. At first, Xiao Yichen was sleepy and was about to fall asleep when he suddenly smelled an alluring aroma. He jumped up from the bed like a carp. He sniffed in the direction of the aroma. Lisa walked to the bed with a tray and said expressionlessly, "Get up and eat." Xiao Yichen moved closer. When he saw the steak on the plate, his eyes lit up. "Meat of meat." Xiao Yichen was like a heretic from a cult as he sat upright and devoutly. Lisa picked up the food from the bed and placed the tray in front of him. Like a gust of wind, he devoured the large piece of steak in a matter of minutes. Lisa was dumbfounded. She stared blankly at the knife and fork in his hand, looking as if he still wasn't hungry. She asked eagerly, "Is there more?" "Are you a pig?" Lisa said angrily, "Even pigs don't eat as much as you." Xiao Yichen said pitifully, "I've been hungry for a few days. This bit of meat isn't even enough to fill the gaps between my teeth."